Chapter 126. The dark night, the blood, the slaughter, and the coldness that flowed through the pores of the thick protective suits stimulated the madness in Poison Fang's hearts. Kill, kill, kill. Until they could no longer move a muscle. The cross erected at the center of the square bore witness to the madness of Poison Fang. After the commotion, the ruined cross field was filled with blood, flesh, flying sand, stone fragments, metal wreckage, and fire. In less than 15 minutes, all that was left of the 10,000 or so people was a single spaceplane and 2 fighter jets engaged in a final battle. Sillin and Huimao watched everything quietly. They hadn't stayed around the cross field before this. Using a beast's sense of smell to create traps was something Sillin often did. That was why Sillin had left behind a special scent that could be retained for a longer period of time from the moment he stepped onto Poison Fang's transport, to the Great Hall, and all the way until he set up the trap at the cross field. It was all for the sake of gathering the group of people at the cross field. Now that all the scanners in the area had been destroyed and Carreño's pets had been killed a long time ago, Sillin and Huimao approached the cross field and watched the final madness of Poison Fang in the sky. Sillin, leave the last 3 to me. Huimao had been holding back for a long time. Originally, Huimao was going to show off his might when Sillin forbade him from attacking. He was incredibly disappointed now. No, it's already come to this. You should just stay put and see if there are any survivors on the ground. Let's finish them off and fish out their emblems. Sillin had his own concerns. He didn't want Huimao to expose too much of himself. A minute later, the 2 fighter jets were destroyed and the spaceplane exploded in midair. Everything returned to normal. After a moment of silence, Carreño's voice rang. Hee, Vanguard Division 6 Sillin, you surprised this king. Although he was laughing, there was an indescribable coldness in his voice. Skeleton King Carreño slowly walked out of a half-collapsed building like he was taking a stroll. The collapsed buildings didn't seem to affect the Skeleton King at all. In the past, Carreño would have never believed that 50,000 people were annihilated in 2 hours or so, and Sillin hadn't even done anything himself. Moreover, these people had not died cleanly. It could be said that these 50,000 people had been forced to their death step by step. They had experienced terror, despair, helplessness, and the process of their lives slipping away. From the moment Sillin stepped into the cross field, Carreño had locked his gaze onto Sillin. His night vision was pretty good. He stared closely at Sillin, afraid that he would escape in the next moment. However, Sillin did not plan to escape. It was time to end this matter. To Carreño, the death of 100,000 people stationed on the planet really wasn't that big of a blow. Even if these 100,000 people were gone, he could just take a stroll around Sector V and gather new batches of Poison Fang. Moreover, there were plenty of desperados in the galaxy, and 100,000 people was just a number. Therefore, to Carreño, the most important thing was not the death of these 100,000 people, but Sillin himself. Carreño was going to tear this devil-like brat into 1,000 pieces, burn his bones, and scatter his ashes. Swoosh! Carreño charged at Sillin like lightning. Under the scattered firelight, Sillin could see his body clearly. His body had doubled in size, and there were curved fangs growing out of his torso. There was also a huge black shadow behind Carreño. That was his tail, a barbed tail. When he was charging, the tail swung to increase his momentum and speed. Sillin knew that Carreño wasn't a normal human, but he didn't think that Carreño's true form would look like this. Moreover, the information Shoten had shown Sillin didn't contain Carreño's true situation either. It had to be said that Carreño had hidden himself very well. It was likely that even a mouse, who had been hiding in Poison Fang for so many years, didn't know Carreño's true appearance. As Carreño got closer, a thick, murderous aura hit him in the face. No wonder those birds of paradise didn't dare approach him. It was likely that those little parasites didn't affect Carreño much. At most, they would be a little bit at the time, but they would be forced to death by Carreño later on. Carreño's mask and thick protective clothing were all for show. In reality, Carreño didn't need them at all. This was suppression, true suppression. It was a power that completely surpassed a normal human's ability in genetic state. Perhaps Carreño didn't belong to a single genus. He might be an unconventional person who possessed the bloodline of several genera and absorbed the advantages of each species to become the skeleton king he was today. Scylla thought that his physical constitution was pretty good, especially when he was in a solidified state. However, it was only after he clashed with Carreño that he realized just how strong this skeleton king was. He blocked both Carreño's hand and Carreño's sweeping tail at the same time. His arm felt numb for a moment. What kind of physique was this? He bent his body and backed away, avoiding the 2 rows of sharp teeth on Carreño's torso. To be more precise, they could be considered the specialized bones on Carreño's torso. He looked huge, but his movements were nimble and his attack speed was very fast. Coupled with his physical advantage of having 2 hands, 2 legs, a tail and the 2 rows of specialized bones on his torso, Scylla really couldn't do anything to him for now. Even the current Scylla wouldn't be able to get the upper hand in a head-on clash. Carreño was rich in combat experience, and he knew the weaknesses of humans. His attacks were swift and fierce, and every one of his attacks carried the determination to kill. As the king of Poison Fang, Carreño's presence was overwhelming. A normal person wouldn't have the courage to resist just standing in front of Carreño, much less fight him. Scylla retreated step by step while blocking Carreño's attacks. Carreño was so strong that Scylla had no choice but to retreat every time he blocked an attack to neutralize the impact. At the same time, he had to deal with the rain of fists, claws and annoying tail. Scylla parried the claws with long, sharp nails and dodged to the side. Then, he leapt into the air and kicked Carreño's sweeping tail. Using the force of the tail, he jumped backwards. While he was in the air, 2 guns appeared in Scylla's hands. Bang bang bang. The bullets flew at Carreño from the front and 2 sides. Carreño, who was chasing after him, did not dodge. His tail flattened and covered Carreño's body like a cloak. When the bullets collided with his tail, the sound of metal clanging could be heard. The bullets that hit Carreño's tail would at most leave a mark or break the surface layer of skin. It would recover in no time. Scylla narrowed his eyes. When he landed on the ground, he exerted strength in his legs and continued to retreat. This time, it wasn't bullets but flying knives. They weren't much slower than bullets, and they attacked from 3 directions at the same time. Carreño used the same method and widened his flattened tail to cover his body. The flying knives made cracking sounds when they hit his tail. However, the cracking sound was followed by the sound of corrosion. Chapter 127. Scylla would never fight head-on like an idiot and ask for abuse when he knew he was weaker than his opponent. The flying dagger was specially made by Scylla before he arrived. The dagger was not thin, and the brittle outer shell was wrapped in a strong corrosive liquid. In order to seal the corrosive liquid inside the dagger, Scylla even used some expensive inert materials to prevent the corrosive liquid from corroding the outer shell of the dagger. In fact, Scylla's original idea was to use the outer shell of the dagger to scratch the surface of the opponent's body, and then let the corrosive liquid seep into the opponent's wound to inflict the greatest amount of damage. However, even if the dagger could not scratch the opponent's skin, the corrosive liquid that splashed out from the broken dagger would still be useful. Now, it was indeed the case. The liquid splashed on Carreño's flattened tail, and the pain from the corrosion made Carreño very angry. This kid is playing tricks again. Carreño let out a long roar, as though he was venting all the anger in his chest. The sound waves shattered the remnants of the crosses that had been destroyed to the point where only a part of them remained. Hui Mao, who was squatting on a cross that only had a third of its original shape left, jumped down and flicked his ears. For him, this level of sound wave was not enough to hurt him, but he had to find a better place to watch the fight. Carreño's roar traveled far, even El Mouse and Joaquin inside the energy barrier of the hall heard it. That's... Joaquin was surprised. It should be the Skeleton King's roar, said El Mouse. However, he could also hear the anger in the voice. To be able to force the Skeleton King to this extent, Scylla was indeed very surprising. After all, according to El Mouse's understanding, the Skeleton King, Carreño, would not let out such a roar even if all his subordinates were killed. Carreño was really angry, extremely angry. After so many years, apart from being injured by that person, until now, Carreño had never been so sullen. A common human, a young brat, not only had he killed his 100,000 subordinates, he had even injured him. Carreño threw caution to the wind. At most, he would just lose one of his tails. It would grow back after a few years. All he had to bear was a moment of pain. What he needed to do now was to crush this cunning brat. As long as he didn't clash head-on, Scylla was able to dodge. In this cross field, one was retreating while the other was pursuing. Scylla was still retreating and throwing his flying daggers. A layer of Carreño's tail had already been corroded. Carreño was already numb to the pain in his tail. He did not believe that Scylla could continue retreating like this. Scylla was not in a hurry. Carreño was currently in a state of rage. This was a good sign, because in a state of rage, Carreño did not have much brainpower to think about other things. When Scylla was very young, he had heard a conversation like this. Do you know why the hunter is superior to the prey? The hunter is stronger than the prey. Only the strong are the hunters, while the weak are the prey. No, because the hunter will set traps. To the fish, the angler was the hunter. They would cast the bait and quietly wait for the fish to take the bait. The people who lived in the forest would set traps to catch large and ferocious beasts. Perhaps when they were excited, they would watch the trapped beast fight. They had long been used to using the smallest amount of effort to catch their prey. Scylla and Carreño both saw the other as prey. But in the end, who would be crowned as the prey? When Carreño realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. The first thing that had happened was his tail. Then, the numbness quickly spread to the rest of his body. Only now did Carreño realize that the cunning kid was playing tricks again. The highly corrosive liquid had corroded the surface layer of Carreño's tail, allowing the toxins behind it to play a better role. The same throwing knife, the same proportion, but the completely different inside. Not to mention Carreño, even El Mouse might not have thought of this. If the proportion was different, El Mouse might have become suspicious and guessed that there was a difference in the throwing knife. But when Scylla made these, he had completely taken this situation into consideration. The highly corrosive liquid and the concentrated neurotoxin. When Scylla made these two kinds of liquids, he had deliberately taken their proportion into account. However, even if they were not of the same proportion, with the current Carreño, he was afraid that he would not notice it. At the same time, his selective ignorance of the pain in his tail had caused Carreño to notice the first poisonous throwing knife. By the time he did notice it, too much of the toxin had already seeped into his tail, and it had spread to the point where he could no longer save it. El Mouse's evaluation of Carreño after hiding in Poison Fang for so many years was that Carreño was ruthless, strong, smart, but not smart enough and not cautious enough. His past achievements had caused the Skeleton King to overlook too many potential threats. He had always thought that he was standing at the top, and that he could look down on the ants below him. But in reality, he had been pulled down into the abyss before he could truly understand how lonely it was to be at the top. Scylla had collected the neurotoxin in the vines that had once poisoned Carrie. On the green planet, Scylla had also collected other neurotoxins from plants and animals. The current one was something Scylla had specially prepared for Carreño. Inside Enji's workshop, Scylla had bred two types of insects, mixed them with a highly corrosive liquid, and synthesized this neurotoxin that even a rank A genotype could not withstand. Carreño could only feel that everything around him was moving further and further away. His hearing, touch, smell, and taste seemed to be deteriorating, and every joint was rusting like scrap metal. Moreover, the rust was getting worse and worse, and his movements were becoming slower and slower. Every muscle was spasming, and his breathing was rapid but irregular. For some reason, Carreño felt that no matter how much he breathed, the oxygen he breathed in was not enough to satisfy his needs. His mind was becoming more and more muddled, and the sporadic sparks seemed to burn his eyes. He could not help but look into the darkness. Not far away, Hui Mao was squatting on top of a pile of rubble and watching the battle with wide eyes. At this moment, he tilted his head and looked at the man who was walking in an S shape just a moment ago. His nimble and ever-changing tail was dragging weakly on the ground, and Carreño looked like a drunkard as he staggered through the ruins. Sillin stood 100 meters away from Carreño and watched as Carreño moved towards him step by step. However, the effects of the neurotoxin had severely affected Carreño's senses and thoughts. He slowly deviated from his path and finally collapsed on the spot where he once punished sinners and watched slaughter. In the past, it was Carreño, Poison Fang's skeleton king, who sat on a high place and watched the ant-like beings on the ground suffer bloody battles and torture. But now, the roles had changed. It was as if Carreño could see him lying under a giant cross, and the devil-like young man standing at the top of the cross, watching indifferently as he struggled in silence. His throat could no longer produce any precise syllables, and all that came out were indiscernible grunts. In truth, he only wanted to say one word, devil. Sillin still stood at a distance and watched expressionlessly. There was no coldness, no mockery, no joy or relief after revenge in his eyes. His eyes were as calm as ever. A while later, Sillin took out a small marble-like object and flicked it at Carreño, who was lying in the ruins. The marble hit Carreño's body and scattered around Carreño. The wind blew past. The surviving birds of paradise around the ruins smelled the scent in the air and swarmed towards Carreño. Sillin closed his eyes and sensed the remaining commotion above the ruins. It's time to end this. Chapter 128. When the first ray of light shone upon the ruins, the dust in the air had already settled down. The only things floating above the ruins were the lingering smell of gunfire and flesh and blood. Inside the great hall, the 4 energy shields gradually faded and dissipated. It was time. According to Sillin, they could walk out of this place without needing to change the energy shields when they dissipated. Moreover, at some point in time, not a single Poison Fang member was left around the Great Hall. Thinking was one thing, but El Mouse and Huaqin could not take the first step. Both of them were veterans. After the energy shields had dissipated, the lingering aura in the air became even more obvious. It was as if it was telling them the faint experience of fear and despair hidden in the darkness. El Mouse and Huaqin looked around warily. El Mouse was ready to throw out more energy shields at any moment. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 5 minutes later, Huaqin inhaled deeply and took the first step. Since Huaqin had taken the first step, El Mouse followed suit. The duo moved their feet step by step. All of the surveillance equipment had been destroyed, and El Mouse could not obtain any images from them. There were a few Poison Fang members who had been dead for a long time lying around the Great Hall, but there were no more than 10 of them. If they were to rely on their hearing alone, they could tell that there was no one around them. When El Mouse activated the scanner, it also showed that there were no living people nearby. El Mouse knew very well how many Poison Fang members were stationed on this planet. That was why he dared not believe the situation in front of him. After all, the area around the Great Hall was a core area, wasn't it? Forget 30 or 50,000, there should be at least 10,000 people, right? But in reality, there was not a single living person on the scanner. At most, a few bugs would occasionally jump past them. El Mouse and Huaqin had an indescribable fear towards bugs. Perhaps it was because Sillin had shocked them too much earlier, but they instinctively wanted to run when they saw the bugs jump past them. However, the bugs seemed to be uninterested in them, so they felt a lot more at ease. However, this peace of mind didn't last for long. The two of them saw a hole suddenly burst open in the chest of a dead man. The clear sound of bones breaking made Emus and Huaqin quickly adjust their guns in that direction. They didn't even bother to wipe the cold sweat that was dripping down their foreheads as they stared straight at the place where the sound came from. Then, they saw a bug slightly larger than the one they saw earlier run out of the person's chest. After the insect glanced at them, it quickly left their line of sight. Emus and Huaqing wouldn't overlook the bug's preemptive attack the instant it saw them. However, the bug stopped its attack in the end, glanced at them, and then left. Fear. It was not the instant destruction, but the torturous approach to death step by step. They knew what was in front of them, but they could not avoid it. It was at this moment that El Mouse and Huaqing seemed to recall some of the things that had happened before. Fear. It was not the instant annihilation, but the torturous death that approached step by step. They knew what was in front of them, but they could not avoid it. The duo was silent for a few minutes. In the end, El Mouse said, "Let's go take a look at the cross field." After all, a large-scale battle happened there. They had heard the commotion from the Great Hall earlier. Huaqing could not contact Silen, so he did not object to El Mouse's suggestion. Although he was mentally prepared, he could not calm down when he saw it for himself. It was like a sacrificial ceremony paved with flesh and blood, supported by the flames of war. Broken limbs and remains were everywhere, and there was not a single flat spot in the huge cross field. The place that was once Poison Fang's recreation ground and bloody execution ground for punishing sinners was now a pile of ruins. 50,000 people had died here, but not a single complete corpse could be seen. Some of them had been eaten until only bones remained. What on earth happened here? This was Poison Fang we're talking about. The famous group of lunatics in Sector V. The duo stood at the edge of the cross field and stared at the man at the center of the ruins with complicated gazes. A lens popped out of the device in El Mouse's left eye. Through it, he could see the situation inside the cross field clearly and record it all at the same time. There was a cross more than 5 meters tall at the center of the cross field, and Poison Fang's emblems were piled underneath it. El Mouse did not know how many emblems there were, but the fact that they were here meant that the owners of the emblems were dead. Lying on top of the emblems was a skeleton. It did not look like the skeleton of a normal human, and there were 2 rows of specialized bones at the torso. On top of the cross, Silen was sitting casually. He was holding a book in his hand and reading slowly. A gray cat was squatting on his shoulder. Its eyes were narrowed, and it looked very comfortable. Silen's voice was neither fast nor slow, but it was very comfortable. It was like a cool breeze that swept through the ruins, calming the restless heart inexplicably in this land surrounded by red sand. Emus didn't know what language it was, but the translation device translated it right away. It was Standard Sector X's sector language. The dying criminal listens to the honest cries in his heart nestled in the universe in this ridiculously beautiful starry sky. Wind and rain ushered in the era, birds from heaven passing by the human realm. Silen ignored the arrival of Emus and Huaqing and continued to read on his own. The light that slowly rose from his back caused the man, the cat, the pile of symbols and the cross to form a long shadow in front of him. There was a saying in the League of Stars that 50 years made a generation. It had been almost 50 years since the glory of the previous generation. Was the new generation about to rise? El Mouse smiled. Poison Fang's infiltration mission was over, and if there were no accidents after he returned to the military, his peak was about to arrive. In that case, how many people would become the leaders of this new era? No matter what, El Mouse was glad that his peak was in this era. Even if he could not become a leader, he could at least witness the glory of this era. Vanguard Division 6 Silen. Compared to the 6th Division's commander Shotten, and compared to the other B Squadron commanders of Vanguard, El Mouse believed that Silen was more than qualified to enter the Hunt ranking. The Hunt ranking was a ranking the military made specifically for hunters. Only the higher-ups of the military knew the names on the Hunt ranking. Anyone who was listed on the Hunt ranking would receive special treatment from the military, even more so than Skeleton King and Caranio. Right now, El Mouse did not know what kind of treatment this was, but perhaps he would know very soon. At this time, Silen had finished reading the poem in the book. He closed the book, but did not jump down from the cross. You're here. Chapter 129. El Mouse and Huaqing walked over. It was still the same brown-haired, honest-looking young man that Huaqing was familiar with. He still wore the same smile, but his attitude towards Scylla was completely different. Facing Scylla like this, El Mouse and Joaquin felt a chill rise in their hearts at the same time. More than 20 hours had passed, and 100,000 people had been wiped out. However, the person who caused all of this still wore his usual expression and was leisurely reading a poem on a morning like this. It was as if the ruins and corpses beneath his feet were nothing more than an insignificant background. Joaquin swallowed and asked carefully, "Scylla, those people from Poison Fang, they're probably dead." "Dead, they're all dead." Joaquin opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. Should he rejoice that the 6th Division had produced such a talent? "Lieutenant Akai and the others have left on a spaceship, but I don't know the specifics. The captain will send a starship over. I don't know when it will arrive, but I believe it won't be too long." Scylla said. "Is that Carreño?" El Mouse pointed at the skeleton on top of the pile of emblems and asked. "Yes." Scylla nodded. Both El Mouse and Joaquin stared at the skeleton in great surprise. El Mouse clicked his tongue in wonder, so Carreño's true face has never been revealed. Although only Carreño's skeleton was left, it was obvious that Carreño was different from before. Can I collect some data?" El Mouse asked Scylla. Right now, El Mouse was obviously more wary of Scylla than anything else. Moreover, Carreño was Scylla's prey. If he wanted to study someone else's prey, he should at least inform the hunter first, right? "That's fine. Name a price." Name a price." El Mouse only reacted after a long time. He smiled and said, "Of course, you can name the price. After all, the prey is yours." The inert materials Scylla used to design Carreño's flying knife were very expensive, and the composition of corrosive fluids and neurotoxins also required some costs. Therefore, before making these things, Scylla made a list. He couldn't lose money, right? Yes, there was also the cost of labor. Scylla decisively raised a finger. 10 million. 10 million. Joaquin almost shouted. Carreño's head might be priceless, but El Mouse only needed to collect information about this skeleton. 10 million for this? El Mouse stared at Scylla's eyes for a while and knew that this kid was not joking. "Sure, but I don't have that much money right now." "That's fine." Scylla took out the Vanguard's special receipt and began to write it skillfully. After he was done, he handed it to El Mouse. "See if there are any other questions. If there are no questions, please sign here." El Mouse looked at the receipt in his hand. The corner of his eyes twitched and he sighed in his heart. He really did not know where Vanguard Division 6 found such a monster. After El Mouse signed the receipt, he squatted down to look at some data about the skeleton. After seeing the data, El Mouse felt a lot more balanced. According to the data, it was indeed worth 10 million. It would have been better if the skin and flesh were still there. Unfortunately, there was only a skeleton left. It was hard to imagine that the arrogant and tyrannical Skeleton King would end up in such a state. However, when El Mouse was collecting information, he noticed a pair of eyes staring at him. At first, he thought it was Scylla or Joaquin, but later he felt that something was wrong. El Mouse turned his head and saw the Huimao squatting on Scylla's shoulder staring at him with its round eyes, as if guarding against thieves. Guarding against thieves? El Mouse was puzzled. Why is a cat staring at me like that? Although Carreño did not tell El Mouse about Huimao looking for energy ores, El Mouse had his own way of finding out. Therefore, he knew that this should be the talking cat that could find energy ores. However, why would Scylla bring it to such a dangerous place? Wasn't he afraid that this cat would not be able to return? The man and the cat stared at each other. Huimao had adopted a strategy of not moving if the enemy did not move. If the enemy moved, it would not move. Knowing that El Mouse was from the military, Huimao was much more careful. It was not as casual as it was with other hunters. Seeing that Huimao did not respond, El Mouse did not say anything and continued to collect data. However, Scylla, that guy is cheating. Hui Mao suddenly shouted. Its round eyes stared straight at El Mouse, full of anger. El Mouse spread his hands helplessly. How am I cheating? Although he knew that Hui Mao could speak, El Mouse was still shocked by the cat's sudden voice. Even Silin and Huaqing, who were in the middle of a conversation, were looking at emus with the same expression. Kid, you're trying to play tricks right under our noses? You want to keep Carreño company, right? El Mouse wanted to say something, but Hui Mao raised its paw and pointed at El Mouse. He's shaving, Hui Mao did not know how to describe it. Sampling, Silin said tacitly. Yes, sampling. There's an additional fee for sampling. El Mouse's face froze. How could he collect information more accurately without sampling? Silin looked at El Mouse and calmly took out the receipt. Name your price. Huaqing and El Mouse wanted to say, I'm not collecting anymore. But I've already signed 10 million. Wouldn't it be a waste to give up on me? Therefore, El Mouse signed another million. You don't have to pull a long face. I know you can report the debt to the higher-ups, it's not like you need to cut your own flesh. Silin said while looking at Emu's bitter expression. Then, he handed over 2 bills. Looking at the numbers on the 2 receipts, El Mouse's eyes darkened. He pointed at Silin with a trembling hand. You, don't go too far. Carreño's bones are not worth that much. 10 million was written on each of the 2 receipts. When did I say that these 2 receipts were related to Carreño? Silin looked at El Mouse. You've collected those 2 worms, haven't you? El Mouse froze. He did not expect Silin to know about it. He had secretly collected samples of the 2 worms, and Huaqing had not noticed it. However, according to El Mouse's evaluation of the 2 worms, 10 million for each was considered cheap. Therefore, Huaqing watched as El Mouse signed 2 more 10 million receipts. Huaqing roared in his heart. Vanguard Division 6 has produced a genius. 5 hours later, a starship of the 6th Division arrived at the outskirts of the planet. Led by Shoten himself, they had tracked down the delayed signal Hui Mao had left behind. Although the delayed signal would be delayed, it had the advantage of concealment and could evade Poison Fang's signal detection. On the way here, they encountered the spaceplane carrying the unconscious Akai and the others. Other than 3 who were still in the ICU, the rest were in normal sick rooms. This allowed Shoten to breathe a sigh of relief. Originally, they hadn't placed much hope in Silin. Carrie, Xiaoshang, and the others were even prepared to fight with everything they had, but they didn't expect the result to be like this. When they arrived at the planet, they saw the debris floating in outer space. When the people at the cross field fell one after another, some people on the starships that had stopped outside tried to escape. Therefore, Carreño pressed the controller in his hand. There was a button on the controller that controlled the bombs installed on the starship. The people of Poison Fang only had 2 choices. They could either die in battle or be blown to pieces. Carrie and the others stared blankly at the debris outside the planet. At the same time, the signal receiver converted the received signals into information and displayed it on the big screen. Silin did not allow them to enter the planet. He only ordered them to send out an unmanned spaceplane, and forbade anyone from the 6th Division from approaching the planet. Although Shoten did not quite understand Silin's words, he did as he was told. After the spaceplane returned, Carrie gave Silin a heavy punch when he saw that Silin was fine. He had been holding a grudge against Silin's solo operation this time. You're not allowed to do something like this next time. Call us if you're going to do something. Yeah, me and Ba Dao too. Xiao Shang said while patting Silin's shoulder. Hey, who's that guy? Carrie pointed at the meeting room door next to him with his chin. When Carrie saw the stranger who boarded the ship at the same time as Silin and Huaqing, he was about to go up and take a look. However, Shoten had dragged everyone into the meeting room for a secret discussion and didn't give Carrie the chance to inquire. Ah, that's the enemy of my enemy. Silin did not say Imao's name because the name Imao's was definitely a fake. As for what Imao's real name was in the military, Imao's probably wouldn't tell him. The people of the 6th Division did not know what method Sillin had used to completely wipe out Poison Fang, but one thing was for sure. They were starting to feel a sense of fear towards Sillin. Be it the normal personnel or the lieutenant commanders, everyone was obviously careful when they spoke in front of Sillin. Sillin had made a great contribution this time. He had saved the hostages, seized back the energy ores, and even destroyed Poison Fang. Even the A squad of Vanguard probably wouldn't have been able to accomplish such a feat with such efficiency. At the same time, Sillin also told Akai, Huaqin, and the others that without Huimao, he could only destroy Poison Fang but not the hostages. Therefore, it was all thanks to Huimao that Akai, Huaqin, and the others were able to survive. As a result, Huimao's status rose once more. Every time Huaqin and Akai saw Huimao, they would smile kindly. This also led to Huimao being pampered to the heavens, and his status in the 6th Division was even higher than that of a lieutenant commander. Shoten did not ask too much about Sillin's actions on the planet. When Sillin said that the planet would be listed as a forbidden zone for the next 100 years, Shoten agreed without hesitation. He ordered the people of the 6th Division to not step foot on the planet for the next 100 years, and also informed Bart and Songba Leruo not to enter. Huaqin and Imao's did not object to the planet being listed as a forbidden zone in the slightest. They knew that the reason the insects did not attack them must be because of Sillin. If Sillin did not leave any medicine or other preventive items on them, they would have turned into a pile of bones a long time ago. After the group returned to the 6th Division's main ship, Diaz called for Sillin before he could even rest. "You want me to be the lieutenant commander?" Sillin glared at the smiling Diaz who was lying on the sickbed. The guy's complexion looked much better now. "No way." Sillin shook his head and prepared to leave. He had overworked his brain and was so tired that he was going to shit himself. However, the door was firmly shut. He tried the door lock, but it was useless. Sillin turned around to look at the one-armed Diaz. "What's wrong, uncle? Are you planning to force yourself on me?" Chapter 130. "I wouldn't dare in front of you." Diaz made an innocent expression. "At most, it's like forcing a duck onto a perch." "Then I'm really sorry, but I'm not a duck. Please find another duck." "Sigh, you know, my arm." Diaz looked lonely, but he was interrupted by Sillin before he could finish. "Acting pitiful is useless." Ahem, Diaz straightened his expression. "I've discussed with Asha. After we leave Sector Z this time, the 6th Squad's injured members like me will head to Sector E together. You know, Sector E is most famous for its medicine, and our injured members go there to recover. It's just that we don't know how long it will take, so after some consideration, I've decided to let you take over the position of vice captain of our squad. If you don't like it, you can hold the position for now until I return. However, I may need a long time to recuperate." Diaz was injured like this because he was protecting Asha, but it was a blessing in disguise. His relationship with Asha progressed very quickly. Sillin looked at the hopeful Diaz and said, "I'm going back to sleep." "Sigh, don't go. Actually, our squad usually doesn't have much to do. Beaver is the one who takes care of everything. That's why I, the vice captain, have always been relatively idle compared to the others. It's just that I'm wearing the hat of a vice captain, and I'll only show up when there's something important. That's why I'm pretty idle." Diaz talked endlessly about the benefits of being a vice captain to Sillin. If Sillin didn't want to manage too many things, then so be it. In the past, Diaz didn't really manage things anyway, so he was a lot more at ease with Sillin. Moreover, no one would object to Sillin becoming a vice captain. In the end, Sillin agreed. He had his own considerations. Just now, Diaz said that a vice captain's rank had higher authority to know certain information and come into contact with certain things. In other words, he would have a greater chance of finding out about the Yuki Fujihara family. Sillin had no doubt that the Gen family was at a very high level. If one didn't reach that level, perhaps they wouldn't even be able to touch the surface of the Gen family. At the very least, there was no relevant information at this stage. After leaving the room, Sillin touched the tattoo on his thumb. Jenya's coffin was still inside. When would he be able to send Jenya back to the Jen family? Meanwhile, in Yudi and Beaver's ward, they were out of danger. They just needed to rest for a while. Moreover, with their gene levels, their recovery speed would be much faster. At this moment, Carrie, Xiao Shang, and Tang Qiuqiu were all gathered in the ward. After being depressed for such a long time, everyone was finally in a much better mood. Tang Keqiqiu, who had been silent for a few days, finally began to speak. Yudi and the Miantuan were playing a puzzle game on the microcomputer while talking to the others. Suddenly, the ward's door opened. There was no one outside, but when they looked down, they saw Hui Mao strutting in with his tail up and a proud look on his face. Looking at Yudi and Beaver who were lying on the bed, Hui Mao said without any conscience, "You guys are so weak. You actually got beaten up like this. Everyone, don't compare us to you and that monster master of yours." Although Sillin didn't talk about the situation on that planet, from the images taken from outer space, the situation on that planet was really terrible. They really didn't expect Sillin to have such a trick up his sleeve. As soon as the Miantuan saw Hui Mao, he jumped up and ran toward him. It looked like he wanted to bond with Hui Mao, but in fact, he wanted to divert his attention because he was about to lose the game. After eating a candy that Tang Keqiqiu handed to him, Hui Mao walked around in front of everyone, feeling like a leader inspecting them. Then, he nodded in satisfaction. They were all in good spirits. "Wheeze, why did the vice-captain call Sillin over?" Carrie asked. Hui Mao jumped onto a high shelf and looked down at everyone. He said proudly, "Diaz is leaving for treatment, and Sillin is taking over as vice-captain." Don't worry. Since I'm your vice-captain, you don't have to be afraid if anything happens in the future. I'll cover for you." Is Sillin the vice-captain or Master Cat the vice-captain? His attitude was like a cat with the title of vice-captain on his head. Everyone had expected that Diaz was leaving for Sector E to get his arm treated. They were a little surprised that Sillin was taking over as vice-captain, but they didn't object to it. Carrie and the others who were familiar with him aside, even the other members of the 6th Division wouldn't object to it. After the Poison Fang incident, Sillin's prestige was very high. Yudi smiled, "That's good. Master Cat will take care of them from now on." His words were sincere. Everyone knew what Hui Mao was capable of. He had saved Carrie, Akai, and the others before, so they might need Hui Mao's help when the time came. The next day, during the 6th Division's main ship conference room attended by Bart and Song Baleruo, Shoten announced that Sillin would be taking over Diaz as the vice-captain of the 6th Division and the person in charge of the original 6th Division team. The Asha team had also appointed a new person in charge, Zaya Chasha. She would take over Asha's position as vice-captain. As for Asha, she was accompanying Diaz to Sector E to get his arm repaired. After the meeting was over, Bart purposely patted Sillin's shoulder twice heavily. "Good boy. Not bad. We'll be waiting for you at the A Squadron." Songba Leruo did not object to Bart's words. It was obvious that he approved of Sillin's decision. Based on Sillin's performance this time, he absolutely had the strength to enter the A Squadron. However, they did not recommend Sillin to the A Squadron immediately. Instead, they decided to wait and see for a while. Moreover, the 6th Division had gone to great lengths to find a talent like this. It would not be good to poach him away just like that. If Sillin was fine while he was still the vice-captain, then Bart and Songba Leruo were prepared to promote Sillin to the A Squadron straightaway. Receiving the approval of two famous A Squadron figures, Bart and Songba Leruo, Sillin's status in the 6th Division had imperceptibly risen yet again. The weapons they developed based on the energy ores were officially put to use as well. This undoubtedly boosted the 6th Division's confidence. After a period of recuperation and reorganization, the 6th Division embarked on their return journey. They had completed their mission this time, collected enough information on the planets, found special energy ores, and destroyed Poison Fang's secret base in Sector Z. These achievements were enough for them to stand out in the vanguard squad. Moreover, they had only used half of the originally scheduled 5 years. Bart also told them that the A Squadron was prepared to allocate a huge sum of money to the 6th Division as a reward for the 6th Division's achievements this time. This way, the 6th Division would have more funds to develop themselves. At the outskirts of Sector Z, there was a very wide rock belt. More than 20 starships were parked there, and Navigator and Heaven's Birth's B squadrons were among them. The reason they were parked here was because there was only one passage in this rock belt, and only one fleet could enter at a time. Otherwise, problems would easily arise if more than one fleet entered at a time. So, looking at the current situation, there was a problem. At first, there were a few hunter regiments arguing, and no one was willing to give way to the other. All of them were saying the same thing: why should I let you go first? But not long after, AB Squadron from Heaven's Birth and AB Squadron from Navigator arrived almost at the same time. Therefore, the rest of the hunter regiments shut up and happily watched the 2 B squadrons of the 4 great powers squabble. Chapter 131. There were a few relatively safe entrances and exits at the edge of Sector Z. While it was possible to enter Sector Z from non-safe zones with better security, it was much more dangerous. Poison Fang had entered through these dangerous zones. They were not afraid of taking risks. Bart, Songba Leruo, and the others had also entered through non-safe zones. Unlike Poison Fang, they had higher technology and the ability to withstand risks. However, under normal circumstances, the B squadrons under the other hunter regiments and the 4 great hunter regiments basically entered through the safe passageway. There was a section of rock belt at the entrance of every relatively safe zone, and there was only one official passageway in each rock belt. The rock belt beyond the range of this passageway would greatly affect starships and spaceplanes, so normally only one fleet was allowed to pass through. In reality, the League of Stars could have opened this passageway wider, but it was limited to this size for ease of management. There was a planet at the periphery of Sector Z. It was where the League of Stars' army was stationed, and they could supervise the area around the rock belt. Who would have thought that today would be such a coincidence that all these hunter regiments had chosen this entrance, and all of them had come at this time? The League of Stars garrison on the planet was happy to see the conflict between the hunter regiments around the rock belt. It would be best if these hunter regiments could fight each other to the death, and the garrison could find them accordingly. When many hunter regiments ran into each other, they liked to show their insignia. Therefore, the hunter regiment's insignia flashed above the giant starships around the rock belt, as if they were afraid that others wouldn't know where they came from. After Navigator and Heaven's Birth starships had arrived, the other hunter regiments were obviously weaker. The 2 insignia alone were enough to scare away some hunter regiments. As expected of the Great Four, even their B squadrons were enough to intimidate others. Navigator and Heaven's Birth's B squadron's starships blocked the passageway, and neither would give way to the other. They couldn't put down their pride in front of this many hunter regiments, and if they allowed the other to enter first, then it wouldn't take long before rumors spread throughout the entire galaxy. If that happened, not only would they lose their position in the hunter regiment, they would also lose face as a whole. The 2 B squadrons each blocked half of the passage. If they tried to force their way through, they would definitely crash into those rock belts. On the planet where the garrison was located, the people in the surveillance room looked at the image displayed on the screen and laughed gloatingly. Suddenly, one of the surveillance personnel reported, "Sir, there's a fleet on the other side of the rock belt requesting to pass." "Oh. Which department?" The officer raised his eyebrows and asked. "It's a squadron of Vanguard." The officer smiled. He didn't think that 3 of the 4 great B squadrons would be gathered here today. The officer then said, "Send them a message. Tell them that the exit here has been blocked by Navigator and Heaven's Birth, so there's no way to get through." "All right." The monitoring personnel were also looking forward to the result of the 3-way collision. At the same time, the Navigators and Heaven's Birth B squadrons blocking the entrance of the passage received news that Vanguard Division 6 was about to pass through, and they were hoping that they could make way for them. Both Navigator and Heaven's Birth B Squadron captains were amused when they heard this. Vanguard Division 6. Who do you think you are? Coming out? Fine, think of a way yourself. I'm not moving anyway. Let's see what you can do about it. Not long after the communication ended, all the hunter regiments and the surveillance room on the garrison planet noticed that a fleet was coming from the other side of the passage. They really dare. Their first thought was that the other side had gone mad. Their second thought was that this was going to be a good show. At this time, all the hunter regiments had received the signal from the other side. It was a signal unique to Vanguard's B squadrons, and under normal circumstances, hunter regiments would make a corresponding retreat when they received such a signal. However, the current situation was that all the hunter regiments other than the four great ones had retreated to the side, and only Navigator and Heaven's Birth were fighting Vanguard. 1 against 2. Interesting. No matter which side won, it would be a rare show for them. The signal displayed on the screen indicated that the two sides of the passage were getting closer and closer. The Navigator and Heaven's Birth B squadrons had already given their orders, and their military systems were ready. If they really wanted to fight, they wouldn't mind opening fire right here. Moreover, there were 2 B squadrons from 2 of the 4 great ones on this side of the passage. Vanguard's 1v2 had to look at their opponents first, right? In many people's opinion, Vanguard Division 6 had acted recklessly this time. To put it bluntly, they had no idea what was good for them. However, this opinion was soon overturned. Just when Navigator and Heaven's Birth were about to open fire, the other side suddenly deviated from their flight path. This meant that the other side wasn't inside this passage, but they showed no signs of slowing down at all. What on earth are they trying to do? There was a flash of white light, and a composite starship covered in a layer of dark red energy shield charged out. Moreover, it was charging right above the Navigator and Heaven's Birth B squadrons. The rock that had been blocking the front of the composite starship was frozen by the white light, and then turned into dust when the black-red energy shield crashed into it. The black-red energy shield of the composite starship looked even stranger and more mysterious in this atmosphere. As the starship flew out, it left behind some stone fragments that had been frozen by the cold beams of light. The light reflected by these frozen fragments was incomparably gorgeous against the dark background. When the starships flew out, in the signals received by the various starships and the monitoring rooms of the garrisons, 6 consecutive sounds that sounded like accented cannons appeared in a specific rhythm, one louder than the other, interspersed with the music of beads. The data and pictures displayed on the electronic screens of some of the starships that were not heavily guarded were all jumping in the same rhythm. The hunters who heard the music felt as if their hearts were beating in sync with the music. The music slowly turned ancient and distant, like a sharp knife that pierced through every space. Above the starship, a huge saber-like cursor appeared. Although it was only a cursor, it was so sharp that everyone had the illusion that it was even more imposing than before. There was a number, 6, next to the sharp knife. Vanguard Division 6. Although they didn't attack the Navigator and Heaven's Birth B squadrons, Vanguard's 6th Division had flown out of their heads. Moreover, they were wearing the distinctive dagger insignia of Vanguard when they flew out. A slap in the face. This was a slap in the face under the watchful eyes of the public. The 4 great hunter regiments had been at loggerheads all this time. There wasn't much open fighting, but there was a lot of covert fighting. Just like this time, the 2 sides didn't exchange fire at all, but the result was much more intense. After the composite starship flew out, it didn't communicate with anyone. There was only the fading sound of music and the weakening signal as the starship flew further and further away. It was like a king on a journey, leaving only a glimpse of his silhouette and the feeling of being looked up to in that instant. Chapter 132. What would the hunter regiments think? What would the 2 B squadrons from Navigator and Heaven's Birth think? What would the garrison at Sector Z analyze? Vanguard's 6th B squadron couldn't be bothered to care about those things. The main reason Schotten chose such a forceful approach was because of Bart's words, "Be forceful when you should be Songba Leruo's evaluation of Shoten was that he was overly cautious and lacked dominance. If he did not change, then the 6th Division could only linger around the same spot no matter how great their gains were. In order to lead the 6th team further, Shoten chose a more forceful approach this time. After all, the newly developed weapon had given him a lot of confidence. 2.5 years later, the 6th team exited Sector Z. Maybe it was because Sector Z was a little traumatized, but it felt like everywhere was heaven after they left. Sector Z was filled with irregular magnetic fields, constant ion storms, high radiation, and strange creatures. They had to be careful almost everywhere they went, so they felt like their breathing was a lot smoother after they left Sector Z. Although the news of the elimination of Skeleton King and Caranio was not widely publicized, everyone in the circle knew about it. The 4 great hunter regiments, the military, and some major forces all knew about it. However, not many people knew that Sillin was the one who actually destroyed Poison Fang's base. This was Sillin's own idea. He did not want to be too ostentatious, so it was better if the name Sillin appeared less often. After all, this name could stir up too many people's sensitive nerves, and those people were not easy to pacify once they were stirred. After they left Sector K, the extra time in the 5-year plan was given to everyone as usual. Some people would return to their hometowns to rest for a while before meeting up with the fleet, and some would follow the fleet to Sector K. Sector K was the gathering place of the 4 great hunter regiments. It was the only sector dominated by hunter regiments in the League of Stars, and it was practically heaven for hunters. This was also one of the reasons why Sillin decided to go to Sector K before he joined Vanguard Division 6. Every time a 5-year mission was completed, the B squadrons would return to Sector K. They would come into contact with the A squadrons, report their results, and hand over certain things. In the past, every time they went to Sector K and came into contact with the A squadron and other B squadrons, the 6th squad couldn't even straighten their backs, and they almost felt like they were invisible characters. But this time, they were emboldened. Even Barths and Songba Leruo had praised the 6th squad, so the other people's opinions were more or less the same. Therefore, the 6th squad's return to Sector K this time was a little excited even as they remembered the dead. Other than the energy blocks, Shoten had also returned with the Skeleton King, Caranio's remains, and some emblems made from Poison Fang's bones. Caranio could be considered an overlord, so his death would have a certain impact. It was best to leave Caranio's death to the A Squadron. After the A Squadron dealt with him, they would also erase some secrets they did not want others to know. This was also what Sillin hoped for. Imaus would be brought to the A Squadron at Sector K. There, Shoten and the A Squadron would negotiate with the military. The military would have to pay a price to redeem Imaus, and the outcome was basically up to the A Squadron. As for the remaining Poison Fang members at Sector V, it was also a good opportunity for the military to win the hearts of the people. The military would not be too stingy if they could learn more about Poison Fang. Of course, this was also a great contribution from the 6th Division. Shoten still had to ask the A Squadron for the promised development funds. Sillin had been sleeping ever since the meeting. He had overused his brain, and his brain had been calculating at high speed during the incident with Poison Fang. He hadn't really rested at all, so Sillin only woke up after the fleet left Sector Z. Shoten asked Sillin about his plans, and Sillin thinks for a moment. Although he was now carrying the burden of a lieutenant commander, he still had 2 years of rest, and there was basically nothing to do. There was still plenty of time, so Sillin decided to return to Sector X and take a look. He would walk around every sector, and no one would know that he was the one who eliminated Poison Fang and killed Caranio anyway. It would be a good distraction to look around. When the time came, he would meet up with everyone at Sector K. Shoten did not object to Sillin's idea. He told Sillin some information about Vanguard's communication with the Hunter Regiment, and told Sillin to be careful, contact him if he had any difficulties, and that Vanguard would support him from behind. This was the benefit of joining a hunter regiment. At the very least, he would have a big hand supporting him from behind. Carey was preparing to return to Sector K and meet up with his friends from the other B squadrons. Ba Dao was going back for a while. Xiao Shang was going with the fleet since his birthplace was Sector K in the first place. Yudi and Beaver needed to recuperate, so they stayed on the starship and moved with the main force. Diaz had brought the wounded to Sector E for treatment, and they would see a whole person the next time they met. However, Tang Qiuqiu was prepared to follow Silan. She felt that she would be happier following Silan. After the decision was made, Silan greeted Shoten and informed the rest of the squad. Then, he took Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao and piloted a small spaceplane to Sector X's transit planet when the starship passed by Sector X. After the spaceport's identity verification and danger inspection, the spaceplane landed on Planet X, C-100. Planet X, C-100 was an important transportation hub and transit station for Sector X. It had a special port for private spaceplanes and private planes to stop at, and it could also be used to help watch over things. Silan parked the spaceplane at an empty spot, went through the procedures and paid the corresponding fee. Then, he went out to forage for food with Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao. When Tang Qiuqiu heard that Silan had met Diaz here, she strongly requested to go to the restaurant near the airport. After 3 years, she came to this restaurant again. It was still the same, and it was still served by a robot and a waitress together. However, the waitress was no longer the one in her memories, and Silan himself was no longer the same as before. Silan told Tang Qiuqiu about the time he met Diaz all those years ago, and Tang Qiuqiu giggled so hard that she didn't even bother to wipe the ice cream stuck to her nose. Hui Mao, on the other hand, didn't have much interest in the past at all. Instead, it stared at the flying cars flying everywhere outside the transparent window, its round eyes filled with interest. It thought to itself how interesting it would be if it could take a picture of those flying cars one by one. Silan didn't plan to fly a spaceplane over. It was inconvenient to go through too many procedures. After eating his fill, he took a stroll around the area and then boarded the flight to Planet X, C-362. Pets were not allowed on a passenger plane, and if you really wanted to bring a pet along, you must put it in a specific cabin on the plane. Hui Mao was an exception, however. It could stay in a corner of the plane and roll around without anyone noticing. When he saw that familiar planet and the satellite arrays around it again, Silan felt a different feeling in his heart. It had been 3 years, and he was back. Chapter 133. Planet X, C-362, Planet Brown Earth. It was still the same as it was 3 years ago. Nothing had changed, but after seeing the prosperity of the 10 trade zones, even the most upscale district of Planet Brown Earth paled in comparison. Luxuriously dressed, pretentious upscale people could be seen everywhere on the streets, walking with arrogant eyes, as usual. Guarding an inch of land and living their own lives was a joy to them. Pretty good. At least most of them were self-satisfied and happy with what they had. Old Devon had opened a small shop in the city, and had also hired people from the slums to help. He was living a good life now. Having a son in his old age, Old Devon always had a smile on his face. At least when Silan saw him, Old Devon was always smiling happily. Tang Qiuqiu held a large cup of ice cream in one hand and a lollipop in the other. She ate happily, occasionally looking around curiously. Hui Mao was clamoring to take a flying car. He had originally planned to take a train, but at Hui Mao's request, Silan took a flying car instead. He hailed a taxi, gave the destination, and the flying car rose into the air and flew away. Silan did not allow Hui Mao to talk nonsense outside, so Hui Mao expressed all of his emotions through his round eyes. He stared unblinkingly at the flying cars in front and behind the taxi, and could not help but move his claws. There was no other way, his claws itched, and he wanted to pat them. Silan looked at the scenery outside the taxi window. This planet was still the same. If it was in the 10 trade zones, there would probably be a lot of changes every year. The development of lagging sectors was much slower. When Tang Qiuqiu finished the ice cream in her hand, they arrived at their destination. Although this was only the edge of the slums, they could clearly feel the great difference from the prosperous areas in front. "Brother Silan, is this your birthplace?" Tang Qiuqiu asked. In her heart, there was no such thing as a hometown, only the concept of birthplace, and she had no feelings for this concept at all. Yes. Sillin took a deep breath. The air was still a mixture of dust and decadence. Huimao squatted on Sillin's shoulder and snorted occasionally. It was obvious that Huimao despised this place. Especially since he had just come from the bustling city center, the contrast was even more obvious. He really didn't expect Sillin to be born in such a broken place. The poor houses were still the same, and the garbage dump was still the same. However, there were fewer people, and there were more abandoned houses. Walking along the familiar street, he came to the door of a bar. This was the bar that old David had given to Sillin. It was also the small shop that Sillin had worked in for many years. Before he left, he had sublet it to Cheng, who used to live in the same slum. Sillin had checked the original savings card. For the past 3 years, Carrie would have an extra sum of money every year, and it was always on time. Although this amount of money was nothing to Sillin, it was enough to show Cheng's character. Sillin was very satisfied. Cheng's brother, De Cheng, used to live in the slums as well. However, De Cheng was ruthless and risked his life to work in a high-radiation area. Unexpectedly, his genotype evolved from rank F to rank E, and he officially stepped into the city. However, Cheng didn't have the guts. He was satisfied as long as he could live peacefully. That was why when Sillin rented the bar to Cheng, he was very happy. Now, it seemed that Cheng had been living well for the past 3 years. Sillin was no longer the same as he was 3 years ago. No one could recognize him. The shop's business wasn't good, but it was passable. Sillin didn't stay at the bar for long. Instead, he went to Jenya's house. The AI robots had been taking care of the house, so it wasn't very dirty. The Fuji tree hadn't grown at all, and it looked exactly the same as it did 3 years ago. After looking around, Sillin contacted an intermediary and bought the abandoned houses. He sent the blueprints to them and asked them to build according to the blueprints. At the same time, Sillin transferred all the money to them and even paid a little more. The intermediary was very happy and promised that they would do a good job. Sillin used another identity to go through the relevant procedures. After obtaining the ownership of the houses, he left the rest of the matters to the intermediary. They would supervise the completion. Sillin had savings on hand, and they were all galactic credits, which could be exchanged for even more sector credits. He wouldn't mind even if he had to buy the entire slums. However, Sillin chose to let this slum town develop on its own. He didn't want to interrupt this town's pace. Sillin also learned some things. The reason why there were fewer people here was mainly because of the chain reaction brought about by a newly developed planet, Planet X, C369, not far from Planet X, C362. Planet X, C369 was originally a planet that was much poorer than Planet Brown Saturn. It was much more backward, and this planet's habitability was only grade B. In other words, if one wanted to migrate to Planet X, C369, they would need more facilities to support it. These facilities would cost a lot of money, and this was also the reason why no one had paid attention to this planet for so many years. However, 3 years ago, not long after Sillin left Planet Brown Saturn, Planet X, C369 was inadvertently spotted by an investigator from the Phoeniers family, a famous family in the League of Stars. The investigator obtained the rights to develop and manage the planet, and thus the planet's fate changed from then on. It was named Little Garden. Little Garden was twice the size of Planet Brown Earth. Its development required a large amount of labor, and the one thing Sector X did not lack the least was cheap labor. Planet Brown Earth, which was relatively close to Little Garden, provided almost 1/5 of the total labor force. Of course, these labor forces were of higher quality, and even the lowest genotype was rank E. Since Planet Brown Earth had lost a large amount of labor force from the city center, it gave the people of the slums a chance. Some of the strong and healthy F-rank genotypes were able to find a job at the city center of Planet Brown Earth, and that was why the slum population was decreasing. In just a year's time, Planet X, C369, which was originally in an almost primitive state, had changed greatly. It truly lived up to its name, becoming a beautiful and colorful garden. Right now, Little Garden had become famous in Sector X thanks to the Phoenix family's promotion. Moreover, it had become one of the more important tourist planets under the Phoenix family. Every day, people from all over the League of Stars would come to visit due to its fame. Do you want to take a look at Little Garden? Silen asked Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao while holding a flyer for Little Garden. Yes. Yes. They answered in unison, looking very expectant. The image on the flyer was too attractive. Alright, then our next stop will be Little Garden. Let's take a look at the legendary Sea of Flowers. There was a direct flight to Little Garden on planet Brown Saturn, but Silen had already applied for a pet certificate for Hui Mao. The inspection station outside of Little Garden was under stricter management, and while it was possible to sneak past it, Hui Mao would still have to come out once he reached the planet. In order to prevent more problems from happening in the future, Silen decided to apply for a pet certificate without hesitation. However, the word pet caused Hui Mao to grit his teeth. He thought for a moment and decided to forget about it. He wouldn't stay in the designated pet cabin for too long anyway. He would arrive after a nap. Little Garden. That sounds pretty good. Chapter 134. Everyone knew that Little Garden wasn't small at all. It was twice the size of planet Brown Earth, but there was an endless stream of people coming and going on this planet every day. The entire Little Garden planet was practically filled with people. The Phoenix family's businesses were relatively strict in all aspects. The direct passenger plane stopped at the spaceport outside of Little Garden. Similar to Seven Lights University, the passengers had their identities checked at the spaceport before boarding a specialized carrier plane to enter the planet. Before they even entered the spaceport, the passengers on the passenger plane began to get excited. The colorful and dreamy planet could be seen from the cabin windows and display screens. It was truly fascinating. After the checks were done, Silen led Tang Qiuqiu into the specialized carrier plane. As for Hui Mao, it continued to squat in the pet cabin of the carrier plane. The moment they landed and stepped out of the carrier plane, the fragrance of flowers assaulted their nostrils. It was rich but not cloying, but the moment they walked out of the port, the fragrance changed. It became simple, elegant, fresh and pleasant. The moment they stepped out of the carrier plane, the fragrance of flowers changed almost every few steps they took. There were all kinds of scents, and flower beds of all sizes and shapes could be seen everywhere. There were even some vine-like flowers hanging in the air. That was so suffocating. Hui Mao shook its fur, raised its butt and stretched its back before jumping onto Silen's shoulder. Its cat head twisted and turned continuously as it looked at the surrounding scenery in astonishment. On this planet, be it the buildings or the means of transportation, they were all in the shape of flowers or carved with flower patterns. They inherited the diversity of flowers and filled this planet with the dreamy colors of a fairy tale. Silen was going to rent a means of transportation, a flower car. This was an indispensable tool for the tourists who came here. It looked like a small carriage, except it was in the shape of a flower. There were tables and chairs inside, and the tourists could sit on it to eat, drink, chat and admire the flowers. The speed, route and so on could all be adjusted. It was very convenient. When they arrived at the flower car rental point, Silen looked at the display screen and asked Tang Qiuqiu, "Which one do you want?" There were all kinds of flower cars on the screen, and it was dazzling. Tang Qiuqiu pursed her lips and looked at them for a long time. In the end, she chose the Lily of the Valley car. The flower car was like Lily of the Valley, white and bell-shaped. It was very cute. Since there were only 2 people and a cat, Silen chose a small flower car. After paying, a card popped up next to the machine. It was the proof of rental and the key to the flower car. At the same time, a 2-meter-tall Lily of the Valley car automatically drove out of the station. After scanning the card on the door of the flower car opened, and the fragrance of Lily of the Valley wafted out. After entering the float and setting up the control panel, 3 sofa chairs and a small round table popped out. The chairs were soft and looked like they were sitting on the petals of a lily of the valley. Sillin had set up a short route. First, he had to go to a few nearby shops to buy some food and other necessities. Tang Kakikiu bought ice cream and candy, Huemao's codfish burger and fish biscuits of various flavors, and Sillin also bought some food to fill their stomachs. One had to admit that the service at the place managed by the Fenier's family was pretty good. The quality of the food was also very good, and it wasn't too expensive. Sillin even bought a palm-sized, flower-shaped camera for Tang Kakikiu to play with. The 2 people and the cat took a photo as a memento. The Lily of the Valley car floated on the passage. Sillin had set the speed and route. Right now, all they had to do was sit in the car and eat, chat, and admire the scenery outside. 80% of Little Garden was a scenic area, which was enough for the tourists to see. There were intersecting floating passages in the scenic area. After the parade route was set, the float car would drive on these passages and bring the tourists to enjoy the scenery. Although they had felt that there were flowers everywhere before, it was only after entering the scenic area that they deeply felt like they had entered a sea of flowers. As far as the eye could see, there was an endless sea of flowers. Above the sea of flowers, there were some butterfly bees flying around. Butterfly bees looked a lot like butterflies. They had large, colorful wings, but lived like bees. They would collect nectar, but they wouldn't harm the garden like butterfly larvae. The manager of Little Garden had even specially built some beehives for them. All kinds of butterfly bees danced among the flowers, adding a lot of liveliness to the sea of flowers. The colorful world, the overwhelming scenery, and the refreshing fragrance of flowers all caused one to stop and linger in their tracks. The scenery at every stop was different. Even though the previous stop was already eye-catching enough, they didn't expect to see something else at the next stop. It was hard to comment. There was a monitor in the float car that would display the information of the area it passed, the types of flowers, the names of the scenic area, and so on, so that the tourists could better understand it. Rainbow Bridge. Big Brother Sillin, let's go through Rainbow Bridge. Okay. Sillin adjusted the route, and the float car drove toward Rainbow Bridge. Tourists who came here would adjust their route to pass through Rainbow Bridge. Rainbow Bridge was an arched passage surrounded by flowers of 7 colors. From a distance, it looked like a rainbow. At the same time, there were some special suspension devices floating above and around Rainbow Bridge. They were all white like clouds, and water droplets sprayed from them, adding a bit of fun. The children passing by stretched their hands out of the window to catch the water droplets. Tang Qiuqiu was no exception. She could hear their laughter from afar. Tang Qiuqiu also carried Huimao out of the window and drenched him with water droplets. Huimao was also having fun. He shook his ears and shook his head, throwing water droplets on Tang Qiuqiu. He opened his mouth to drink water, and the water droplets that sprayed out had the sweetness of nectar. Wow, look, there's a cat. On a float car in front, a 4 or 5-year-old child poked his head out and smiled, pointing at Huimao who Tang Qiuqiu carried out of the window. The gray cat even waved its paw in the direction of the little fellow, causing the little fellow in front of it to become incredibly excited. The little fellow tossed a bag of fish fillets at the gray cat, and the gray cat caught it with its paw before smiling so widely that its eyes turned into crescents. After passing Rainbow Bridge, a huge figure appeared in the sea of flowers, Flower Goddess, a figure made entirely of flowers. The girl made of flowers looked very demure. White flowers formed the wings on her back, and a long skirt decorated with flowers of various colors. In this sea of flowers, there was a feeling of strolling in a courtyard, very beautiful. Tang Qiuqiu was holding the camera and taking pictures. Sillin poked her little face and said, "Qiuqiu, there's honey over there. Do you want to try it?" "Sugar." Tang Qiuqiu's eyes lit up. She looked in the direction that Sillin was pointing. Not far ahead, there was a small shop that sold honey and other nectar. Nectar and flower tea were all specialties of Little Garden. After all, in the League of Stars, it was very difficult to find a place that was better than here. In this kind of pure environment, the quality of the nectar in Little Garden was also very good. Needless to say, the honey they made was naturally very good. Looking at the information on the menu, Tang Qiuqiu bit her finger. It was really too difficult to choose. In the end, she temporarily chose 10 types of honey and would buy them when she encountered such a shop in the future. After buying the sweets, Silan decided to rest at a stop. There was a plaza here, and tourists could park their float cars here and walk out to get some fresh air. Tang Qiuqiu sat on a flower-shaped wooden stool and showed Silan the scenery that she had taken along the way. Just as she was talking, she was interrupted by a young and angry roar. Get lost! Chapter 135. This roar attracted the attention of all the tourists around them. They saw a flying car with a unique design hovering in the air. Below the flying car were a few bodyguard-like figures, as well as an old man dressed meticulously like an official surrounding a boy around 10 years old. The old man had a helpless look on his face, but he didn't look annoyed. Instead, his eyes were filled with love. Silan knew that people who could use a flying car in a place like this were definitely not ordinary tourists. After all, the management of this planet was rather strict. It seemed that this group of people had quite a background. Even if they weren't from the Fenier's family, they were at least closely related to the Fenier's family. The one who yelled, "Get lost," just now was that young master. Just by looking at his attire, one could tell that he was definitely the young master of some family. Moreover, the way that little guy looked at the people around him with disdain and arrogance in his eyes made Silan think that he was pride. The little guy's face was filled with anger at the moment. One of the bodyguards moved a step to the side and was glared at by the little guy. The bodyguard had no choice but to retract his foot and stand still like a statue. This was clearly the temper of a young master. It did look a little unreasonable. You just told him to get lost just now, but you got glared at right after you moved a step. What are you trying to do? He didn't know what the surrounding tourists were thinking, but at least Tang Qiuqiu couldn't stand it. However, she couldn't be bothered. She nudged Hui Mao with her elbow and pointed at an image displayed on the camera. Ignore them. Let's continue watching. Wheeze, what do you think of this one? The image was taken by Silan when they were crossing the Rainbow Bridge. Tang Qiuqiu pushed Hui Mao out of the car window, and the scattered water droplets reflected a rainbow of colors. Hui Mao moved closer to the other side, and his entire head blocked the image. Obviously, he liked this image very much. You're blocking me. Move to the side a little. Tang Qiuqiu scratched the fur on Hui Mao's head with a smile. In fact, after the young master shouted just now, the surrounding people unconsciously became silent or only whispered to each other. Therefore, Tang Qiuqiu's voice, which was not suppressed at all, seemed a little abrupt. At the same time, it was obvious that Tang Qiuqiu had completely ignored everyone else and was talking to Hui Mao. The young master glared at Tang Qiuqiu, but both Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao were staring at the camera and completely ignored his gaze. The young master was so angry that his face turned red. He had never met someone who ignored him like this. This was simply unforgivable. Bastard! Although it was only 2 words, these 2 words were sonorous and powerful. It was even more imposing than the previous scram. He really deserved to be the young master of a big family. The surrounding people sighed in their hearts. However, it was a pity for the little girl. These people didn't seem to be easy to deal with. Everyone looked at Tang Qiuqiu with sympathy. Silan had been observing the old man. Although it seemed that the bodyguards were looking at the young master, the real person in charge was the old man who looked like a butler. However, the good thing was that the old man didn't show any malice. Hearing the young master's rather imposing roar, Tang Qiuqiu raised her head and glanced at him. The meaning of that glance was obvious: don't shout, don't disturb us from watching the video. Tang Qiuqiu's obviously disdainful glance made the young master's face turn from red to black. He was so angry that he almost jumped up. However, slowly, the child seemed to have thought of something and his anger slowly subsided. Instead, he had a strange and malicious smile. The old man next to him raised his eyebrows. He had a bad feeling. The little young master raised his chin high and put on the airs of a young master as he walked step by step towards Tang Qiuqiu. At the same time, following the little fellow's movements, the few bodyguards and the old man also followed closely beside him. Seeing that Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao still treated him as heir, the young master raised an arrogant smile and raised his finger to Tang Qiuqiu opposite him. He said to the old man next to him, "Don't you need bodyguards? She's the one." Tang Qiuqiu turned off the camera, took out a honey candy and put it in her mouth. She jumped off the wooden stool and took Silen's hand. "Let's go. We've rested well. Let's continue to enjoy the flowers." She didn't want to talk to this crazy young master. "Stop." Following the boy's voice, a few bodyguards blocked the path in front of Silen and Tang Qiuqiu. Silen stopped Tang Qiuqiu from kicking him and looked at the old man. The old man gave him an apologetic look and stepped forward to introduce himself without losing decorum. "My name is Castella, and this is my family's young master. I wonder if I might have the honor of treating the two of you to afternoon tea." Tang Qiuqiu looked at Silen. She knew that she couldn't speak carelessly in a situation like this. The other party was going to use force. Silen looked at the old man and said with a smile, "Then I'll have to trouble you." When Castella introduced himself just now, he deliberately revealed a symbol on his sleeve. It was the emblem of the Fenier's family. "Since the other party didn't make things ugly and offered a ladder for you to step down, wouldn't it be the same as forcing the other party to throw a tantrum if you didn't step down? Moreover, this planet was the Fenier's family's territory to begin with. Even if they wanted to make trouble, they wouldn't go so far as to offend the local bully." Silen believed that the old man in front of him wouldn't go so far as to deal with them just because of this. Therefore, Silen agreed to Castella's suggestion. The little boy looked at Tang Qiuqiu smugly and beckoned for the flying car, which had stopped in the air, to descend. This flying car was very big, about the same size as a large flower car. However, the interior was much more luxurious. Silen and Tang Qiuqiu went inside and sat down. Hui Mao jumped into Tang Qiuqiu's arms and allowed Tang Qiuqiu to tickle it. The bodyguards took their seats at the back and front. There were only 4 people in the middle. Silen and Tang Qiuqiu sat opposite the young master and Castella. Tang Qiuqiu didn't give the person opposite her a friendly look. She merely looked at Hui Mao in her arms and scratched its chin. The flying car rose into the air and stopped after flying for a short distance. A small tea table popped up in the middle of the room. Castella picked up the teapot and poured 4 cups of tea. Castella was the first to state that this was a misunderstanding. He had no choice but to bring Silen and Tang Qiuqiu up here. After all, it wouldn't be good for their reputation if they continued to cause trouble down there. Secondly, Castella expressed that this young master's suggestion was also a misunderstanding. However, before he could finish speaking, the young master forcefully interrupted Castella's words. "I said, let her be a bodyguard. Didn't you say yesterday that you wanted to add more bodyguards? Just nice, let's use her." Tang Qiuqiu had a strange expression on her face. She moved closer to Silen's ear and whispered, "Big brother Xiao Shang once said that those who let a woman protect are all gigolos who live off women." Although Tang Qiuqiu's voice wasn't loud, Castella and the young master would definitely be able to hear her since they were so close. Tang Qiuqiu didn't intend to hide it from them in the first place. She was purposely letting the young master hear her. The old man didn't have much of a reaction, but the young master was infuriated. He slammed his palm on the tea table in front of him. "Who do you think you are? Letting you be my bodyguard is already an honor for you. How dare you mock me? A brat who doesn't know anything. You're not even as tall as me, shorty. Gigolo. Ugly freak." Sillin and the old man watched as their children slammed the table and glared at each other, arguing until spittle flew everywhere. Both of them remained calm and said nothing. Bang! Tang Qiuqiu slammed her fist on the table and gritted her teeth. She wanted nothing more than to send this annoying bastard flying with a kick. She used to do whatever she wanted in Sector V in the past, and there were plenty of times when she would be served with a gun at the slightest disagreement. But after joining the 6th Division, she had toned down a lot. Still, this guy in front of her really pissed her off. Tang Qiuqiu turned around and asked Sillin, according to the rules, I can accept missions during my free time, right? Sillin thinks for a moment. Sure. Alright. Tang Qiuqiu looked at the brat in front of her, if the pay is good and it's within my free time, then I'll accept the mission to protect you, Gigolo. The young master looked at Tang Qiuqiu disdainfully, how much pay can someone like you be worth? You overestimate yourself. I might as well hire someone from the Big Four. The Big Four referred to the 4 great hunter regiments. Tang Qiuqiu paused for a moment. She seemed to be hesitating about something. Sillin took a sip of tea and said, Go. I'll be at the back if anything happens. The corner of Tang Qiuqiu's lips curled when she heard Sillin's words. She fished out the item hanging around her neck and slapped it on the table. I am Tang Qiuqiu, a member of the 6th Division of the vanguard of the Big Four hunter regiments. Gigolo young master, may I know the price of the Big Four's hunter rewards? Chapter 136. Looking at the dagger-shaped emblem with a 6 on it that Tang Qiuqiu had slapped on the table, even Costello was a little stunned, much less this young master. He couldn't tell that it was actually one of the Great Four. Naturally, Costello could tell whether the emblem was real or fake. That was why he was surprised that Vanguard actually had such a young hunter. Moreover, with Costello's knowledge, he could tell from the emblem that this little girl was a core member of the B Squadron. Vanguard Division 6. This is fake, right? The young master's face was red as he roared angrily, but it was obvious that his kidneys were lacking. Tang Qiuqiu let out a humph and put the emblem back on her neck. She carried Hui Mao back onto her lap, scratched Hui Mao's chin and said, Some people just can't take a loss, can they? Hui Mao narrowed his eyes and gave face by meowing. The young master was so angry that he almost flipped the table. Costello straightened his expression, My apologies. So you're Vanguard's hunters. I hope you won't blame me for my slight neglect just now. Actually, with Costello's identity, there was no need for him to be so polite to the hunters of 2B squadrons, even if they were members of one of the Great Four, Vanguard. However, the main reason Costello was acting this way was because of the 6 on Tang Qiuqiu's emblem. Vanguard Division 6. He had recently received many secret reports regarding this B squadron, and according to his understanding, this B squadron had a strong momentum to rise. Since you're hunters of Vanguard, then I need to reintroduce myself. This is my young master, Fenrir's Tobo, and I'm his servant. Welcome to Fenrir's little garden. Since Costello said that he would reintroduce himself, it meant that it was time for Sillin to introduce himself. Sir Sillin put down his teacup and took out his own emblem, Vice Commander of Vanguard Division 6, Sillin. Sorry for the interruption. Costello's eyelids twitched. Vice Commander. This young man in front of him was actually the Vice Commander of Vanguard Division 6. Now, Costello really had to admit that he was blind. Such a young vice captain and such a young member were truly astonishing. The flying car left the scenic area and landed at a manor. This was the Fenrir's family's private lodging area. Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao were sitting in a reception room. The servants brought out all kinds of pastries. Tang Qiuqiu and Hui Mao ate happily, completely ignoring Tobo, who had a cold expression on his face. Sillin and Costello went to another meeting hall. Costello told Sillin about the mission this time, and at the same time, explained the relevant issues. The Fenrir's family's young master, Tobo, was bored at home, and he just so happened to hear that a group of people from the family were heading to Sector X's little garden for supervision work. Therefore, he asked his parents to agree to accompany them to Little Garden to relax. Since the young master was going on a journey, it was only natural that the security work had to be done well. There were even a few corvettes, but not long after they arrived at Little Garden, they received a request for help from another of the family's properties in Sector X. Half of the bodyguards had gone over to support them, but the number of bodyguards was insufficient. The young master had also grown tired of playing here, and the personnel who were transferred away had not returned even when the original return time arrived. For the sake of Tobo's safety, Castella did not act according to Tobo's wishes. If they were to leave and return now, the accompanying bodyguards would be insufficient, and it would be easy for something to happen. As for the reason why Tobo was angry earlier, it was because he did not have the patience to stay here any longer. In a fit of pique, he took the float out to relax. In the end, he was still annoyed by the bodyguards around him, and that was why he started yelling at the resting plaza. "Do you think that there's something fishy going on here?" Sillin asked. Indeed. Castella did not try to hide it either. You know that many children of big families have experienced being held hostage or kidnapped, let alone a big family like the Fenier's family. Those who have the guts to act are all strong, and they are not easy to deal with. Not to mention that they are hiding in the dark. Of course Sillin, who had once worked with the heir of the Duance family, Aflon, understood the twists and turns in this matter. Otherwise, Aflon would not have asked Sillin to pretend to be his son back then. As far as I know, a big family at the level of the Fenier's family would protect their young children very well. But why did they take the risk and agree to let little young Master Tobo come to Sector X from Sector F? The distance between Sector F and Sector X could be considered to be quite far. Even if something were to happen, distant waters would not be able to put out a nearby fire. Moreover, Tobo was still young, he was only 10 years old. He did not even have much ability to protect himself. Castella smiled proudly when he heard this. The Fenier's family places great importance on the safety of their children, but the process of growth is just as important. The people of the Fenier's family cannot be afraid of things, and they cannot give up just because there is danger. They need to train, and this age is also the best time to broaden their horizons. Sillin nodded in agreement. It was true that if they were kept in a greenhouse, they would either grow up to be a prodigal or a man who lived off a woman. Take Lung, Ci Jincheng, Knight and the others for example. Which one of them did not have a deep background, but their individual strength was also extremely strong. This was inseparable from their own training. Giving might not necessarily bring about rewards, but wanting to reap rewards without giving was bullshit. How long does the mission last? Sillin asked. If those bodyguards still don't return after 3 days, we will immediately leave and return to Sector F. The mission will end when we arrive safely at Sector F, alright, but I must make something clear first. Tang Qiuqiu is the only one who has accepted this mission. As for me, I have no choice. My own child needs to grow up, so I have to keep an eye on her. The reason Sillin did not interfere with Tang Qiuqiu's actions was because he wanted to give Tang Qiuqiu some experience. As a hunter, she would accept free missions sooner or later. Since Sillin did not participate in this mission directly, Castella only had to pay Tang Qiuqiu for the mission reward. The base reward was 1 million, and another 1 million would be paid after the mission was successful. Originally, Castella had only prepared a base reward of 500,000, but when he saw Tang Qiuqiu blow up a butterfly bee outside the manor with a raise of her hand after receiving a gun, he raised the price without hesitation. Castella sighed. As expected of someone from the vanguard. This girl's gun sense was just too good. She did not need to take time to aim. She fired the gun at the first moment she felt it. She did not even need to look at the result to know that she had hit the target. Food and lodging were included during the mission. For Tang Qiuqiu, who had accepted a free mission for the first time, this was indeed a huge sum of money. Tang Qiuqiu felt as if the road ahead was filled with honey. Although she was excited, she still had to read the agreement seriously. Diaz had said that she could not be careless with the agreement. If someone were to take advantage of a loophole, then she would not be able to do anything about it even if she cried when the time came. After she felt that there were no mistakes, she signed the agreement and officially began the mission. Tang Qiuqiu signed the mission agreement, while Silin signed a different agreement. He had to abide by some of the rules of not participating in the mission. At night, Silin lay on the bed while Hui Mao lay next to him. Because of the mission, Tang Qiuqiu slept in the room next to Tobo's bedroom. Silin, why did this coconut silk family or whatever let Qiuqiu be that young master's bodyguard? Wouldn't it be better to hire someone more capable? Hui Mao wagged his tail from time to time. A big family like the Fenier's family usually wouldn't hire a hunter as their bodyguard. They trust the people they nurture more, so that old fox Costella must have some reason that he didn't tell us. Still, no matter what, this is a pretty good growth experience for Qiuqiu, said Silin. That's true. Besides, Qiuqiu can get 2 million for this mission. She said she'll treat me to a fish feast when the time comes, hee hee. Go to sleep, foodie. You can even taste a fish feast in your dreams. Hui Mao snorted twice, curled his body into a ball, and hugged his head as he slept. In the middle of the night, Silin opened his palm and a few flying insects flew out. Silin looked at the direction they were flying in, and with a wave of his hand, he put them away again. Chapter 137. Although everyone knew that Tang Qiuqiu had become young Master Tobo's personal bodyguard, they treated it like a child throwing a tantrum. The fact that Silin and Tang Qiuqiu were part of Vanguard's 6th Division was only known by Costella and a few others. In the few days before he left Little Garden, the young master was still bored. Since he had a new bodyguard, he brought Tang Qiuqiu, the little bodyguard, out for a stroll. Silin and the other bodyguards followed them not far away. Sitting in the small flower car, Silin and Hui Mao were playing chess. Since Hui Mao had seen the Miantuan and Yudi playing chess before, he got excited and wanted to play a few rounds with Silin. It had to be said that since he was a cyborg, he had powerful computing abilities, so he was pretty good at chess. However, it was not enough to play chess with powerful computing abilities alone. In comparison, Silin's mind was more flexible than Hui Mao's, so Hui Mao was always in a passive state. Beep! Hui Mao lowered his head and stared at the chessboard for a long time before he shamelessly pressed the reset button. He lost again. Silin looked out the window and ignored Hui Mao, who was rolling on the table. Hui Mao rolled back and forth on the table, groaning for a long time. When he saw that Silin was ignoring him, he raised his paw and hooked Silin's sleeve. Ignored. Hooked again. Still ignored. Hui Mao was angry after a long time without any results. He even vented his resentment for losing the game. He leaped, jumped onto Silin's head, and started ruining his hairstyle. Silin raised his hand and flicked Hui Mao's head, then pointed outside the window. Look over there. Hui Mao spat out the hair in his mouth and looked in the direction Silin's finger was pointing. There were people in wedding dresses taking videos. There were often newlyweds coming from afar to take videos. There was nothing special about it. He had seen many of them since the first day. What's so good about taking wedding photos? Could it be that Silin wants to get married? If you want to get married, you have to find a rich, beautiful, fertile, and not a prodigal. That's what Carrie said. I'll ask him when I see him. Silin pulled Hui Mao's ear. You're so stupid. Who said that? What's that? The place you're talking about is the wedding photo shoot. The gray cat patted Silin's forehead in dissatisfaction. Let's test your eyesight. Silin pointed to the person who was taking pictures of the wedding dress. With the place where the bride is standing as the center and a radius of 100 meters, how many butterfly bees are there in this circular area? 169. Hui Mao answered almost immediately. Among them, 132 are carbon-based creatures and 37 are mechanical camouflage. After a pause, Hui Mao continued, among the 37 mechanical camouflage bees, 7 are monitoring the few people taking the wedding photo, 10 are monitoring the surroundings, including us, and 20 are facing the direction of Tang Kakikyu and young Master Tobu. With just a glance, Hui Mao could distinguish the butterfly bees that looked the same to others. Although the disguised mechanical butterfly bees were fine with the other butterfly bees beside them, in Hui Mao's eyes, there was a world of difference between carbon-based creatures and mechanical objects. He could tell with just a glance. There were no surveillance devices installed in the floats. It seemed like the Fenier's family was very concerned about the privacy of their passengers, but in reality, they had other ways to monitor them. Not bad. Not bad. Sillin nodded. Of course. Look at who's doing it, Sillin interrupted Hui Mao's self-improvement. Then have you noticed which mechanical camouflage bees have microweapon systems? Hui Mao's ears twitched and he jumped from Sillin's head to the table. If one paid attention to Hui Mao's eyes, one would notice that his pupils were greatly dilated as he looked out the window. Call monitoring, communication monitoring, gene level analysis, laser scanning, high-density energy stimulation beam. Hui Mao listed a few of the systems on the camouflage butterfly bees. Meow, there's even a self-destruct mechanism. Hui Mao's beard moved as he looked at Sillin. I wouldn't have known if I didn't look. Other than the camouflage mechanical butterfly bees, there are also many mechanical camouflage bees in the flowers and underground soil. I just saw a mechanical camouflage earthworm and a few mechanical ants. Don't they have too many spies? Doesn't this mean that our every move is being monitored? That's true. The Fenier's family has a lot of protective surveillance, but it's not necessarily a bad thing for us. Sillin tugged at Hui Mao's beard. What did you see? That's right. Although there were mechanical camouflage bees everywhere monitoring everyone's every move, it was also a lot more convenient for Hui Mao. This was because he could see the surveillance feed of these camouflage bees without being discovered by the Fenier's family. Whoa meow, they're actually kissing in public. Hui Mao yelled. In another float 50 meters away from the one Sillin was sitting on, a young couple was having sex. Originally, it couldn't be seen from the perspective of Sillin's float, but Hui Mao saw it through the surveillance feed of the camouflage butterfly bee. The young couple didn't think that anyone would notice their actions. Although they couldn't see anyone else from the window, their every move was still known by certain people. Yo, that girl's skirt has a slit. Seeing that Hui Mao was becoming more and more frivolous, Sillin slapped him. Look at how Chio and the others are doing. Chio is playing a game. That young Master Tobu is slamming the table. He looks very angry and is even yelling loudly, but Chio is ignoring him. In another float not far away, Castella and a person who looked like a bodyguard were sitting inside. Is everything ready? Castella asked with his eyes half closed. Everything is ready. However, according to the information we received, there might be some movement on the other side. Isn't this too risky? After all, the young master is following us. Castella sighed. There's no other way. This is the old man's wish. We can only do our best. If we don't run into the people on the other side and everything goes smoothly, of course, that's a good thing. If we do run into them, we can only do our best to keep the young master away from danger. Please don't worry. We will definitely do our best to protect the young master. However, the people from Vanguard. You don't have to worry about that. I have my own plans. Under young Master Tobo's repeated urging, Castella finally ordered his subordinates to prepare to depart. This time, they were escorted by 3 corvettes on their return journey. Although it was not as impressive as when they had first arrived, it was still considered a large scale compared to the others. The 3 corvettes formed a triangle around the starship that Tobo was on. Sillin was also on this starship. However, in order to avoid arousing suspicion and to abide by certain terms of the agreement, Sillin and Tang Chio did not have much contact during this period of time. After all, Sillin did not directly accept this protection mission. Tang Qiuqiu continued to play with her game console every day. As for Tobo, because he lost to Tang Qiuqiu in a shooting competition, he had been practicing his marksmanship on the starship. However, no matter how much he practiced, Tang Qiuqiu only had one sentence to say: stupid as hell. She had completely copied Silen's evaluation of Hui Mao and the tone of voice when she spoke. The 4 starships did not run into any accidents along the way. It was fairly peaceful, and their next destination was not Sector F. Instead, it was Sector H that they would pass through halfway. There was a Phoenier's family branch base there, and it was also the administrative center of the entire Sector H. Costella said that he had received orders to go there and would be delayed for 2 or 3 days. However, young Master Tobo did not lose his temper. In fact, he was quite happy. What was the most famous thing in Sector H? Seafood. Chapter 138. There weren't many habitable planets in Sector H, but most of the planets in this region were special. Almost all of the habitable planets had more than 50% seawater, and some of the planets with rank B habitability had seawater covering almost 100% of their surface area. That was why Sector H was also called the Blue Sector. When Silen was strolling around Seven Lights Business District, he had seen a lot of marine products brought over from Sector H. He had to admit that Sector H's marine products were better than the other sectors. Therefore, there were many business groups or great families who would obtain the development and management rights of a certain planet after they had set their eyes on it. They would use it to breed marine products and so on. The Phoenier's family was one of them. Silen flipped through the planet introductions on the electronic star map and saw a couple of familiar planets. For example, the one called Planet Aquamarine. That planet was Seven Lights' internship planet. However, Planet Aquamarine was a little far from the planet they were going to, so they probably wouldn't run into anyone from Seven Lights. The planet they were going to this time was Sector H's planet Zafia. This planet was the central management planet of the Phoenier's family's business in the entire Sector H, Zafia, Sapphire. Silen had read Sector H's sector language before he came here, so he understood a little about it. Zafia meant sapphire in Sector H's sector language. The name alone was enough to tell how important this planet was. Unlike the other foreign starships, the 4 starships did not need to undergo safety checks at the spaceport. After they stopped at the spaceport and docked with the space station, a specialized spaceplane would escort Tobo and the others into the planet. At the same time, there were many escort spaceplanes and fighters that came out of the spaceport accompanying them. At the same time, their landing spot was different from the other foreign spaceplanes. They landed at a special landing spot, and there were already people waiting around the landing spot on the ground. Silen was a little speechless as he looked at the formation around the spaceplanes. They needed to hire bodyguards for this kind of formation. But if they really needed bodyguards, then the ones who would be taking action would be their internal personnel. Otherwise, with the Phoenier's family's personality, how would outsiders even have the chance to approach them? Tobo, my dear little nephew, it's a pleasure to see you again. A dignified middle-aged man walked over with a kind smile and picked Tobo up. However, his beloved nephew didn't have a good expression on his face. He pushed away the stubbled mouth and said, "Second uncle, you haven't shaved yet." Kirk smiled and tossed Tobo into the air twice before putting him down. Tobo was obviously used to this kind of greeting, so he just kept silent with a long face. After putting Tobo down, Kirk nodded at Costella, "You've worked hard." Costella, on the other hand, was well-mannered. He bowed and said, "This is what I should do." The person Tobo called second uncle was called Phoenier's Kirk. He was the #1 administrator of Planet Zafia, and the CEO of the Phoenier's family in Sector H. Silen had searched for some information regarding the Phoenier's family at Sector H before he came here. Phoenier's Kirk appeared quite frequently in some business magazines with high contribution points. Right now, Phoenier's Kirk wasn't as sharp as he appeared on the magazine. He looked a lot gentler, but this was only when he was facing Tobo and Costella. Kirk's gaze when he looked at other people might not be as sharp, but it was still imposing and intimidating. It gave people the feeling of stopping at the sight of him. As the CEO of a family's business management in a major sector, it could be seen just how important Kirk's position in the Feniers family was. However, even this CEO of a major sector did not put on any airs in front of Castella. In fact, he was mostly respectful. This was something that Cylon could see very clearly. It seemed that Castella's position in the Feniers family wasn't simple. Who's this little girl? Tobo, you're already flirting outside at such a young age. As expected of your father's son. Kirk winked at Tobo. Tobo's father was famous for his philandering ways before he got married. Tobo's face was red from holding back, who would fall for an ugly freak with a bad temper. Of course not. She's very cute. I think she's much prettier than some family's little princess. She also has my favorite blue eyes. As for her bad temper, that was even more out of the question. Who would have a worse temper than a young master like you? However, Kirk did not say this out loud. If he did, Tobo would definitely explode on the spot. However, when Kirk looked at Tang Kakikyu playfully, this CEO of a major sector couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. When Kirk looked over, Tang Kakikyu also looked at him. However, what surprised Kirk was that Tang Chiochio's gaze was too emotionless. It didn't look like something a girl of her age should have at all. Normally, a girl of her age would be shy, angry, and awkward after hearing Kirk's teasing, wouldn't she? Although Kirk did not feel any killing intent from Tang Chiochio, he felt that if the environment was different and the scene was different, this little girl might just pull out a gun and shoot him with an expressionless face. A sense of uneasiness that shouldn't appear on a little girl of her age caused Kirk's eyes to flash for a moment. He straightened his body and swept his surroundings once. Kirk's gaze paused on Cylon for a moment before he withdrew his gaze. During this process, Kirk and Castella had exchanged a brief look with each other. They didn't need to say much to know what the other wanted to express with just a look, and it also meant that the two were very familiar with each other. Cylon's first feeling was that Kirk wasn't their target, and that he wasn't the one who was going to attack Tobo. His second feeling was that the person who was going to attack Tobo was definitely on this planet. Then, as the Feniers family's headquarters in Sector H, who was the person who would choose to attack here? But Hui Mao wasn't in the mood to pay attention to these things. After he exited the spaceplane, he kept taking deep breaths. There was the smell of the sea in the air, and there was also the smell of fish within it. This was truly a heavenly place. Kirk brought Tobo and the others to his private residence. It was also a large manor, and although it wasn't as colorful as the manor in Little Garden, it was still a refreshing sight to behold. There were all kinds of colors ranging from light blue to dark blue, and there were even conches embedded in some places. When the wind blew, they would let out soft humming sounds of different tones. There were also wind chimes made from all kinds of shells that tinkled crisply and added a hint of liveliness to the atmosphere. Due to the unique layout, the entire manor was filled with the smell of the sea. After walking into the manor, Cylon discovered that there were guests visiting the manor since a long time ago. Two children, a boy and a girl, who looked to be around 8 or 9 years old, skipped over and said, "Tobo, you're finally here. We've been waiting for you for a few days." It looked like these two children were old acquaintances of Tobo, and Tobo's face that had been sullen all this time finally smiled. "Why are you guys here?" Tobo ran over to the two children and huddled together. When Cylon passed by the two children, an indecipherable look flashed across his eyes. Before he entered the house, he looked at Castella who was walking in front of him, and Castella just so happened to turn his head to look at him. After making eye contact with Cylon, Castella lowered his eyelids, turned around and continued walking forward. So that's how it is. Now Cylon finally understood why the Feniers family, who had never hired a hunter as their personal bodyguard, would hire Tang Kakikyu as Tobo's personal bodyguard. However, right now, Cylon's confidence in Tang Kakikyu had grown a little more. After all, it was much easier to get used to a game she had already played. Chapter 139. The manor was located next to the sea, and one could see the sea view when they opened the windows. However, for those who came to Sector H, they preferred to be close to the sea and not watch from afar. The people who had arrived before Sillin and the others were the Fenier's family's partners in Sector H, the Binger family. Although the Binger family's influence in the entire GAL could not be compared to the Fenier's family, their influence in Sector H could not be underestimated. The Binger family originated from Sector H, and long before the Fenier's family had expanded their influence in Sector H, the Binger family was already a big shot in Sector H. The two families had worked together for hundreds of years, and their relationship could be said to be close. It was worth mentioning that Kirk's wife was from the Binger family. The two children were the children of Kirk's wife's brother. In other words, they were Kirk's nephew and niece. Moreover, the two children were about the same age as Tobo, and they often played together, so their relationship was much better. The boy was called Binger Rost, and he was a year younger than Tobo. The girl was called Binger Emma, and she was the same age as Rost. They were twin siblings, and the whose little princess Kirk mentioned earlier was none other than Binger Emma. Right now, the three children were playing at the beach and building a sand castle. Emma had even picked up a lot of beautiful little seashells to decorate it. Due to the manor, the coastal areas around it had been heavily guarded. Moreover, there were bodyguards following and protecting them on the beach, so there was usually no danger. The bodyguards on the beach opened up a sunshade pavilion for them, but the three little fellows did not appreciate the gesture. They put away the sunshade pavilion and threw it far away. If they were tired or thirsty, they could just call out, and their bodyguards would immediately bring them towels and juice. Not far away from the three little fellows, Tangkukikyu opened up a sunshade pavilion and placed a deck chair on it. Then, she pulled out the sunshade pavilion's tray and placed a glass of iced fruit juice on it. She played games and drank juice at the same time, enjoying the peace and quiet. Emma and Rost glanced at Tangkukikyu a couple of times and asked Tobo who that was. Tobo was too lazy to say much, and simply said that it was his bodyguard and that there was no need to pay attention to him. After hearing Tobo's evaluation, Emma and Rost felt disdain and disgust towards Tangkukikyu. With their status, there were many people trying to please them every day. Their mother once said that those who tried to curry favor with them only cared about their family's wealth. They didn't really treat them well, so they naturally classified Tangkukikyu as one of them. After all, with Tangkukikyu's age, she didn't look like a regular bodyguard. She was more like a freeloader. As for Tangkukikyu, as long as her eyes were not filled with killing intent, she could just ignore them. Not far away, Sillin set up a sunshade pavilion and lay on a chair to read an e-book. Hui Mao had gone to the sea to look for food. There was nothing good in the coastal waters, so it had gone to the depths of the sea. Sillin was not worried about it. He believed in the ability of that foodie. Vice Captain Sillin. A voice rang out from the side. Sillin turned his head to look. It was the person in charge of Tobo's security. His name was Steele, and he should be under Castella's command. Although Steele was the main person in charge of Tobo's security, he wasn't a serious person. He wasn't like the other bodyguards who always had a stiff face. Hearing Steele's words, Sillin said, "What's the matter, Mr. Steele?" Steele spread out a chair and sat next to Sillin. "Why don't you take on this security job? With your status as the vice captain of Vanguard Division 6, the pay is very high." "I'm not interested. I might as well watch over my own children and play with them." Steele glanced at Tang Qiuqiu who was playing a game and smiled. Tang Qiuqiu is indeed the most special child of her age that I've ever seen. Steele had witnessed Tang Qiuqiu's marksmanship before, and Castella had also said that not everyone could possess that kind of gun sense. Even some experienced assassins might not necessarily be able to achieve that level of accuracy. Moreover, Castella had also told him that even though Tang Qiuqiu was only 10 years old, the number of people who had fallen at the muzzle of her gun was definitely not small. She was also a child around the age of 10. Looking at Tang Qiuqiu and then looking at the three brats who were piling up sand, the difference was really fucking huge. Scylla did not comment on Steele's words. He glanced at Emma and Rost, who were decorating the sand castle, and said, "I'm afraid your security job this time will be very difficult." "Oh." A sharp glint flashed across Steele's eyes. "Vice Captain Scylla, what did you guess?" "Guess? Do you guys always guess when you're doing security?" Scylla put away his e-book and rested his head on his arm. He squinted at the sea in the distance. It was indeed blue. "What do you mean?" Steele's gaze bore into Scylla as if he wanted to confirm if this young vice-captain had really noticed something. "You want to know? Name a price." Steele's face twitched. Name a price." As expected of a hunter, seizing every opportunity to make a fortune. Seeing that Steele was silent, Scylla did not say anything either. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the sea breeze, looking so comfortable that he was about to fall asleep. Finally, Steele could not hold it in any longer. "Did you notice something unusual? Your security job is pretty good, and you've chosen the right targets to monitor. However, I believe that you still haven't noticed something important," replied Scylla lazily with his eyes still closed. When Castella had lowered his eyelids back then, it was obvious that the other party would most likely use Emma and Rost to carry out the operation. However, Scylla was certain that Castella would never have thought of the other party's method. Steele and Scylla pondered. They had been keeping a close eye on the Binger family members who had come over this time. According to Castella's orders, Emma and Rost were the main focus. After all, Tobo was staying with them. Therefore, Steele had also been secretly monitoring the Binger family's bodyguards who were following Emma and Rost. If any of them made any strange movements, he would kill Wuxia. However, there had been no movements from the security team until now. Although Steele did not doubt Castella's judgment, they had indeed not received any strange movements from either party. Now that he heard Scylla say this, Steele's heart could no longer remain calm. After thinking for 2 seconds, he said, "The price is directly proportional to the importance of the content that Vice Captain Scylla has mentioned." Scylla opened his eyes and raised a finger. 10 million, galactic credits. Steele. Could he beat up this guy in front of him? It doesn't matter. Take your time to think about it, but I won't wait until the deadline. Seeing that Scylla was about to fall asleep again, Steele gritted his teeth and said, "Fine." As soon as Steele said, "Fine," Scylla took out a receipt from his pocket. It was obvious that he had prepared it beforehand. "Sign it." Looking at the sparkling numbers, Steele roared in his heart. Hunters and whatnot really deserved a beating. After putting the receipt away, Scylla did not waste any time. He took out the e-book in his hand and flipped through it before passing it to Steele. Steele took it. He was a little confused at first, but after all, he had been by Castella's side for so many years. His mind had expanded quite a bit. The more he looked at Steele, the worse his expression became. "I'll borrow the e-book for a while." He turned around and left after saying that. Scylla waved his hand. "Take it. The rent will be extra. 10,000 per hour." Steele staggered and squeezed out a word through his clenched teeth, "Fine." However, due to the urgency of the situation, Steele had to rush to report to Castella. Therefore, he did not hesitate in accepting Scylla's request. After Steele left, Huimao ran over from the other side of the sea. He shook off the water on his body and smacked his lips, looking very satisfied with his meal. "Scylla, there's a situation in the sea." Chapter 140. It was rare for this glutton's first words to not be about food. "Something's up. Tell me." There were no other bodyguards around Scylla's sunshade pavilion, nor were there any monitoring devices. Perhaps they knew that those little tricks were useless against Scylla, so they did not install any monitoring devices around Scylla. At the same time, Scylla knew that this was Castella's way of expressing goodwill. Huimao stuffed his head into the cup on the tray beside him and drank some water. After pulling his head out, he shook his head and licked his paws to wipe his face. Then, he slowly jumped onto Silen's shoulder and laid down. There's an area where the dissolved oxygen in the seawater isn't normal, and it's been decreasing at an increasing rate while I've been foraging for food. There's something in the sea that's absorbing the dissolved oxygen. The decreased dissolved oxygen was not in the lake, but in the sea. It wasn't in the coastal area, but in the distant sea, and it was a large-scale change. There was no way the Fenier's family would not be aware of such a change, but there was still no movement. This meant that someone had tampered with it. The monitoring device's program or data set up in the sea had been tampered with, and the Fenier's family had not noticed this change. Only someone from the Fenier's family would be able to do this. Hui Mao continued, I've looked at those devices. The temperature, pressure, ion concentration, and so on are all normal. The only abnormality is the dissolved oxygen. If they changed too many items, the chances of being discovered would be higher. As long as they can fool the key items, they'll have achieved their goal. Hui Mao clenched his paws and continued speaking mysteriously to Silen, I went to the depths of the sea and found a few big guys. They're still sleeping, but it looks like they're about to wake up. Big guys. Silen sighed softly. Anything that could be called a big guy by Hui Mao would never disappoint. Somewhere in the manor, inside Kirk's private study, Castella and Kirk were sitting in front of a desk and having a conversation. Next to them was a light screen that displayed the location of the Binger family's visitors. Every single location was monitored in detail, but up until now, the reports from their subordinates had left the duo dissatisfied. It's too quiet. Kirk frowned. Yeah, it doesn't seem like their style. They aren't people who can endure. They shouldn't have waited until now. Castella placed both of his hands on his knees, his fingers moving rhythmically. In other words, they made a move, but we didn't notice it. Kirk did not object to Castella's opinion. That's why I feel uneasy. Why don't we call Tobo back to the manor? If something really happens and we can't react in time, Tobo will be in danger. Originally, he thought that letting Tobo go out to play would cause some commotion, but he didn't expect that there would be no results until now. All right then, as he spoke, Castella's communicator rang. This communicator would only be used by internal personnel in emergency situations. Castella and Kirk's hearts skipped a beat. They exchanged glances. Could there be movement? Connecting the call, the image of Steele appeared. Steele looked very anxious. What is it? Asked Castella. There's an important discovery. Let's talk in the study. After Steele entered the study, he handed the e-book to Castella. This is what Silen showed me. He said that the other party has already made a move. What was shown in Silen's e-book was a type of amphibious parasite. This type of parasite was a type of external fertilization. The female and male parasite would expel mature sex cells from their bodies. When the sperm and egg cells combined outside their bodies, a new life form would form and search for a nearby host. This kind of combination could happen in the air, on the ground, or even in the water. In other words, if Emma and Rost each carried a type of this parasite's sex cells, and these two people had injected some kind of medicine to prevent the parasite from forming a new life form in their bodies, then the one who would suffer the most would be Tobo. Being in close proximity for a long period of time was no doubt a great opportunity. Of course, the parasite on Emma and Rost's bodies would definitely not be the one that Silen showed them. The living environment of this parasite in the e-book was different from the climate and air humidity here. The reason why Silen showed this to Steele was to remind them where they should think about it. Otherwise, it would be too late by the time they realized it. Regarding parasite research, there was a period of peak 50 years ago, but it gradually cooled off after that. Nowadays, the most popular research was still on biochemical exotic beasts, viruses, and related medicines. Therefore, people nowadays wouldn't think about it from this angle. After all, it would be impossible to make good use of a parasite without a certain level of skill. However, Castella and Kirk did not expect the other party to possess such technology. They had miscalculated. While Costella and Kirk were reading the information in the e-book, Steele took out the bill written by Sillin and told them about Sillin's request. "If it's just money, we'll give it to him if he wants it." Costella retracted his gaze from the e-book and said in a low voice, "Yes." Steele paused for a moment and said in shame, "We lost track of the gray cat following Sillin after it left the coastal waters." Costella was not too surprised by this. After all, there was no way a pet that stayed by the side of a lieutenant commander would be ordinary. He waved his hands and said, "It's not your fault. You go out first and wait outside." "All right." Steele bowed and left the study. After Steele left, Costella inhaled deeply and let out a long sigh. "Kirk, do you know how the big thorn in Sector V, Poison Fong, was eliminated?" Kirk shook his head. "I don't know." His main attention was still on Sector H, so he did not know much about the 13 backwater sectors. Therefore, he received the information relatively late. One of Poison Fong's strongholds, 100,000 people, was completely eliminated. The reason was parasites. Kirk could not help but inhale when he heard this. He suddenly felt a little cold. Poison Fong's people were infamous, but they were actually completely eliminated by parasites. The ones who eliminated Poison Fong were Vanguard's people. Since this matter was handled by Vanguard's A Squadron, not many people know the truth. It was common knowledge that information handled by the A Squadrons of the 4 Great Hunter regiments would be seriously distorted, and the truth would be blurred. This was also the capability of the 4 Great Hunter regiments. The one who eliminated Poison Fong was Vanguard Division 6, the squad Sillin was in. Kirk understood now. He had thought that Costella's attitude towards Sillin was a little strange. So this was the reason. "I know what to do now," Kirk said. Costella nodded. "I have a feeling that the parasites are about to reach the peak of their era after 50 years. Just as Kirk was about to give his subordinates an order, Costella's communicator rang. Looking at the display, Costella made a gesture to Kirk, and Kirk immediately put down the work in his hands. Costella had given Sillin his communicator number on this planet. If there was nothing important or if the situation was not urgent, Sillin would not call Costella's number directly. Just like how he had sent the news through Steele just now, although the parasite would affect Tobo, it was not life-threatening for the time being. But now, since Sillin had called Costella's number directly, it meant that the situation was serious. Costella had no choice but to treat it with caution. The communication was connected, and Sillin's image popped up. "I have a message." But Sillin did not continue to say what it was specifically. "Name a price." This time, Costella did not need Sillin to mention it. Chapter 141. This little old man was straightforward. Seeing how straightforward Costella was, Sillin cut to the chase as well. 20 million, galactic credits. Sure. Bill or savings card? Costella said this almost without hesitation. There's no rush. I'll give you the bill. I believe that the Feniers family won't go back on their word when it comes to this. I'll tell you the information first. Sillin straightened his expression. There's a region in the ocean with abnormal dissolved oxygen. That was all Sillin said, but he had already conveyed what he wanted to convey. He believed that with Costella and Kirk's intellect, they would be able to foresee and infer what might happen and certain threats. Since Sillin said that there was a region with abnormal dissolved oxygen in the ocean, and the Feniers family's monitoring device in the ocean did not detect this information, it meant that someone had made a move long ago. Moreover, Costella and Kirk were well aware of the disaster that could be caused by a large-scale abnormal dissolved oxygen in the ocean. Therefore, after hearing Sillin's words, Kirk and Costella immediately got to work. The 3 little fellows who were happily catching crabs on the beach were escorted back to the manor by the surrounding bodyguards. Before they left the beach, Sillin stopped Tang Chiochio and told her a few things. He also reminded Tang Chiochio to be careful. After that, Sillin and Huimao returned to the manor, where Costella had arranged a guest room for Sillin. Cylon passed the bill to Steele and asked him to pass it to Costella. This time, Steele did not look surprised. Instead, his attitude towards Cylon was a little more cautious than before, and his words were not as casual as before. After entering the room, Cylon placed his finger on Huimao's forehead. Huimao then transmitted all the information he had gathered in the ocean to Cylon. It was very strange. Cylon was clearly not a cyborg, but he could receive the information formed from the special signal sent by the cyborg Huimao. Feeling the information transmitted from his finger, Cylon also analyzed the situation here at the same time. He also saw the big guys in the deep sea that Huimao mentioned. If those big guys rushed to the coast at the same time, even if they had weapons, they would probably cause serious damage. What's more, there was an underwater base near the coast. If they were hit by those guys, the underwater base would be destroyed. However, Cylon was curious as to how those people could ensure that the big guys at the bottom of the sea would wake up and make them come over at the same time. While Cylon was analyzing the problem, Kirk welcomed a guest from the Binger family. Binger Warsaw, Emma and Rost's half-sister. Although she was a young lady, she played an important role in the Binger family's business. She also had the power to make decisions on some big issues. This also showed that this young lady wasn't simple. She had long hair that resembled the ocean, a dignified Rayleigh temperament, and a light blue dress that hung to the ground. However, as she walked, it outlined the silhouette of her long legs that were covered by the dress. She walked calmly towards Kirk and Costella. Unlike Emma and Rost, Warsaw's mother was a native of Sector H's ancient race, the New Europeans. Some people said that the New Europeans were the descendants of the mermaids. They possessed the appearance of humans and could walk and run on land. They could also transform into mermaids and swim in the sea. And Warsaw was undoubtedly more outstanding than her predecessors. The New Europeans didn't like to show their legs. This was because most people's first reaction when they saw the New Europeans was to look at their legs. This was because the New Europeans would transform their long legs into tails when they transformed. The New Europeans didn't like other people's gazes. Therefore, it had become a habit over time. They would wear long skirts or robes that covered the lower half of their bodies tightly. As for Binger Warsaw, the people of Sector H called her the Binger family's mermaid princess. This not only showed Warsaw's outstanding appearance and temperament, but also her background. What a surprise! I didn't expect the beautiful mermaid princess to come. Kirk gave a gentlemanly bow. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kirk. My father is ill and unable to come, but this matter is of great importance to him. That's why he sent me over. Warsaw also gave a lady's bow and responded appropriately. It looked like she encountered such things often. I'm very sorry that Emma and Rost have caused you trouble. Warsaw was referring to the fact that some people had used Emma and Rost to harm Tobo. Although the Binger family and the Feniers family would negotiate some matters here, no one from the Binger family had told Emma and Rost that Tobo was coming. In other words, some people had purposely leaked this information to Emma and Rost. With Emma and Rost's temperament, they would definitely cry and beg to come over if they heard that Tobo was coming to planet Zafia. Don't mind them. Even if they didn't use this method, they would have used other methods. Without the Feniers family's permission, Emma and Rost would not have come over either. From a certain perspective, the Feniers family and the Binger family had reached an agreement on this matter. After the small talk, Kirk told Warsaw about the matters here. Other than the parasite reproductive cells that Emma and Rost carried, he also told Warsaw about the matters in the sea. After all, Warsaw, who had inherited the bloodline of a European, would definitely know more about the problems of the sea. After Warsaw finished listening to Kirk's narration, the meaning in her ocean blue eyes was unclear. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly said, "Is it convenient for me to explore the sea?" "Go ahead." Kirk did not have any objections to Warsaw's request. He only hoped that Warsaw could discover more things and understand more. Only then would they be able to act more purposefully. Warsaw did not have time to meet Emma and Rost. Under the guidance of Kirk's men, she brought the Binger family members to an area of the sea on a spaceplane. Kirk had already dealt with the monitoring device in the sea and the related personnel. The fact that they had tampered with the monitoring device 7 days ago meant that these people had been deployed for a long time. Kirk was prepared to clean up every single person in the Phoenix family's territory in Sector H after this incident to prevent any future troubles. Warsaw changed into a new set of clothes and jumped into the sea with a few European newbies. After entering the sea, their arms and legs would change into webbing, tails, and fins. This greatly increased their swimming speed in the sea. At the same time, they could use their skin to absorb some of the dissolved oxygen in the sea. Before long, Warsaw returned to the spaceplane with her men and expressed that she wanted to check out the coastal waters. Although Kirk did not understand Warsaw's actions, he still agreed to it. Some people were not optimistic about this. Although Warsaw and the others were European newbies, the Phoenix family's defense system was also densely spread around the coastal waters. How could there possibly be any abnormalities? When the spaceplane arrived at the coastal waters, Warsaw jumped into the sea with her men just like before. Not long after, Warsaw returned with a pale face and told Kirk that they were in big trouble. Chapter 142. What's going on? On the other side of the communicator, Kirk looked a little nervous. Anything that could be classified as big trouble by Warsaw was definitely difficult to deal with. Mr. Kirk, I've discovered some echo conches in the coastal area. Please send your men to evacuate them. The situation is urgent, please act immediately. Warsaw's voice was trembling slightly, and this made Kirk even more worried. What kind of echo conch could cause this famous mermaid princess to react like this? Although there were many things he did not understand, Kirk still followed Warsaw's instructions and immediately sent his men over with the best equipment. Kirk even personally supervised the operation. When Kirk saw the image sent over by the underwater personnel, he was shocked. The diving personnel pushed aside the seaweed and revealed 6 conches that were about 10 meters long. Other than their size, they did not look much different from other conches. However, it was these 6 conches that caused Warsaw to tremble in fear. These echo conches must not be damaged in the slightest. If they are broken, it is highly likely that they will emit sound uncontrollably. If they emit sound, then everything will be too late. Warsaw said. Kirk sent out one order after another into the communicator. At the same time, the Phoenix family had already put the coastal area under martial law. If there were any unusual movements or suspicious people, they would kill Wusha. What is an echo conch? Kirk finally asked. Warsaw forced a smile upon hearing this. I was careless. Even the natives of Sector H rarely know about echo conches, much less those who are not from Sector H. It is normal that you do not know about them. After adjusting her breathing, Warsaw continued, you know that fishes and many other marine creatures do not have ears in the true sense of the word. They receive and feel sounds through their skin. Some sounds will gather some special sound waves. We cannot hear these sound waves, but they will cause pain when they act on our eardrums. Warsaw pointed at her head, that is why many humans will feel a headache when they hear certain sounds. Or perhaps, the sound waves that are beyond the range of human hearing are completely inaudible to humans. However, these sounds have a huge impact on the creatures living in the sea. I wonder if you have heard of sea god's summon? Warsaw asked. I remember Tobo reading a fairy tale that involved the call of the sea god. In the story, the sea god would summon the monsters that lived deep under the sea to punish the sinners. When Tobo was young, Kirk used to read him fairy tales. He had seen such a story, but Kirk had never taken it to heart. After all, it was just a fairy tale. It sounds like a fairy tale, but the call of the sea god is real. It happens in the deep sea, in the abyssal crevice. When there was a change in the seabed's crust, due to some physical or chemical reasons, there would be some sounds coming from the cracks. Even the most advanced instruments could not simulate it. Humans will get headaches if they hear these sounds, and in severe cases, they will die directly. However, for sea creatures, especially the giant deep-sea sea beasts, these sounds will stimulate their skin, making them excited, and they will chase after the sounds. Hearing Warsaw's explanation, Kirk felt goosebumps all over his body. The communicator in Kirk's hand was on, and Costello was listening quietly on the other end of the communicator. He could not help but sigh at the unknown mysteries of Sector H. Echo conches live at the bottom of the sea, and they usually live around those cracks. Every time a crack makes a sound, the echo conch will remember the sound. Every few years, they will emit the sound they remembered and attract the deep-sea creatures. These creatures will then bring the echo conches to other places and reproduce. For young echo conches, the water environment in the crack zone is not suitable for them. When the crack makes a sound again, the echo conch will stick to the deep-sea creatures and return to the crack surroundings, absorbing the certain factors released from the crack for the echo conch's growth. Therefore, for adult echo conches, the area around the crack is a place they must survive. If they leave this place, they will not live for more than 20 years. Before the echo conch dies, they will emit one last sound, and it is also the loudest sound they have ever made in their lives. According to the condition of this planet's ocean, there are no deep-sea cracks like that, so it is impossible for echo conches to exist. Right now, the echo conches under this sea area should be brought over by the Vezin family. Because the condition of this planet's ocean is not suitable for reproduction, and there are no cracks that emit sound to summon sea creatures, these echo conches have always been in a state of hibernation. However, this state of hibernation is about to reach its limit. If they were placed in the deep sea, they could still persist for 3 to 5 years, but placing them near the sea has undoubtedly accelerated their death. There is a possibility that they will emit their final sound at any moment. Kirk could not help but recall. The cooperation between the Fenier's family and the Vezin family had been cut off 5 years ago, and the closest period of cooperation was 10 years ago. These echo conches should have been secretly placed into the sea 10 years ago as well. This meant that the Vezin family had been plotting against the Fenier's family since 10 years ago. They had set up a hidden bomb on this planet that the Fenier's family used as Sector H's administrative center, and the joint suppression of the Fenier's family and the Binger family over the past 2 years had caused the Vezin family to decide to activate this sleeping bomb. Kirk checked for a bit, and according to the records of the Coastal Seas Defense System, there were no threatening incidents here a month ago. However, if there was anything unusual, then it would be those dolphins that had appeared at that time. On this planet, it was not rare for dolphins to appear in groups near the sea. This was especially true in the past few years, as similar situations had appeared in every part of the planet's coastal sea. From the looks of it, those dolphins had been trained to transport these echo conches here. Since there were only dolphins and conches, the defense system did not classify them as a threat. After all, they had never encountered such an incident before. Moreover, Kirk had never objected to the activity of dolphins and other sea creatures near the sea in the past, but now, perhaps the Vezin family was the one who planned the dolphin swarm incident in the first place. I remember that there are people in the Vezin family who are skilled in taming, and the Vezin family's experienced tamer has always kept a low profile and is unknown to the public. Kirk and Costello also agreed with Warsaw's opinion. As long as these echo conches have not reached their final deadline, as long as they have not made any noise, this matter will be easy to handle. After we get them out, we can throw them far away into the depths of the sea and blow them up. No matter how they scream, they will not have any impact on the coastal areas. Kirk sighed. I hope so. At the same time, he transferred a group of people over to strengthen the defense, to prevent external interference. Inside the manor, Huimao squatted on the windowsill, looking in the direction of the sea. Silan sat on a chair next to the window, reading a book. Huimao's cat tail was draped over his arm. Huimao could see what was happening in the distant coastal sea. Although he could not see the situation at the bottom of the sea, Huimao could monitor the communication device in the aircraft parked above the sea. Through monitoring these conversations, he could roughly understand what was happening. Hui Mao listened to every word of the conversation through the communication device. Then, Hui Mao transmitted this information to Silan through his tail on Silan's arm. From an outsider's perspective, there was nothing unusual about this man and cat. There are fish coming. And there are quite a lot of them. Hui Mao suddenly said. Chapter 143. When Hui Mao said this, inside the spaceplane above the coastal waters, Warsaw's expression also changed. She said to Kirk, "A large school of fish is coming our way, and they're surrounding us from 3 directions. There are no less than 300 of them." The defense system in the sea had obviously detected this as well, but since there had never been a school of fish attack, the program settings did not display the danger level as high. Kirk thought that after this incident, he would definitely reset the threat level of the school of fish attack in the defense system. That was then, and this was now. Right now, the echo conches were being transported under the sea with utmost caution, and yet a large school of fish just had to appear at this time. He could not help but think deeply. Why did such a situation occur? Excluding natural circumstances and other triggers, the only thing left was the human factor. Kirk had mobilized his men to defend the area, and the spaceplane had also readied its weapons. Black marlin. The back of their bodies was almost black in color, and they had dorsal fins that were as wide as sails. They were all more than 10 meters long, and they were much faster than a normal marlin. When they swam with all their might, their speed was no slower than a bullet, and the bone swords formed from their premandibles and nasal bones were even sturdier and could easily pierce through steel plates. Black marlin usually lived far out in the sea, and no one had ever seen them near the coastal waters. But right now, these big marlin were split into 3 well-trained groups and outflanking them. Moreover, it was obvious that they were experienced in dodging bullets and their reflexes, as if they had practiced this thousands of times. In other words, these black marlin had been trained before. There's another school of fish coming from behind them, and these black marlin are just the vanguard. Mr. Kirk, I think it's that mysterious tamer from the Wiesen family. Warsaw said. Warsaw had also heard from the elders in her family that there weren't many true tamers left in Sector H. Following the spread of new technology and other advanced civilizations, the ancient inheritance of communicating with fish had gradually declined. Right now, some of the so-called famous tamers were just jugglers for people's entertainment. A true tamer only needed one person to control hundreds or thousands of marine fishes or other advanced marine creatures for their use. However, in this current developed sector, ancient tamers were no longer known to the public. Warsaw knew of 2 such tamers. One was in the Binger family, and he usually kept an extremely low profile. Not many people in the Binger family knew of his existence. The other was the Wiesen family's tamer, and he was similarly low profile and unknown to the public. However, when the Wiesen family was being suppressed by both the Fenier's family and the Binger family at the same time, this tamer finally made his appearance. Other than this, Warsaw's elders had said that there were actually a lot of ancient tamers in Sector H, but no one knew where they were. They could live in seclusion, or they could enter the world and become ordinary people. Maybe they had brushed past you before, maybe they were the human service staff of a certain restaurant, or maybe they were a certain high official in the administration of Sector H. No one knew. Although Warsaw, as a European newbie, could communicate with some advanced fish, her abilities were far inferior to a tamer's. This was the first time Warsaw had seen a tamer in action since she was born. It was the result of perfect training. These 300 or so black marlin dodged the attacks on the surface and underwater, causing trouble for the people on this side. As they were transporting the Echo Conch, some of their weapons were restricted, and their movements were restricted. In addition to the speed and dodging abilities of these black marlins, the blocking effect was not very good under the surface of the sea. Kirk felt very passive. Moreover, there were waves of attacks coming from behind these 300 or so fish. Where are the people in the underwater base? Why is there still no response? Kirk roared angrily at the people beside him. He had contacted the underwater base earlier and asked them to cooperate with the attack, but he didn't expect that there would be no response at all even after a few minutes had passed. "Boss, the underwater base is under attack. We can't send reinforcements in time." The subordinate beside Kirk pulled up a communication image and passed it to Kirk. There were no less than 3 underwater bases around here, but not a single one had come. They were all being attacked by shoals of fish right now. These were all fish that should have been far out in the sea, and many of them were highly aggressive. It was indeed difficult for them to free up their hands in a short period of time. Kirk did not want to mobilize the people in the manor anymore. He was afraid that the Vezin family would create a diversion. Just as they were busy, an explosion occurred in one part of the manor. Although it was not close to Tobo and the others' living quarters, the 3 little fellows were still shocked by the explosion. After the 3 of them were brought back to the manor, they received Castella's so-called antivirus. Although they did not know what was going on with the medicine and light that was sprayed on their bodies, this was a mandatory request from Castella and Kirk. Even Tobo could not resist. The 3 little fellows, who were exhausted by the antivirus, were about to fall asleep when a big explosion woke them up. The bodyguard came in and told them that it was just a small accident and that they did not need to worry. There were bodyguards standing guard outside the room. On the other hand, Tang Qiuqiu was even more excited. She stopped playing her game and raised all her vigilance to pay attention to her surroundings. Silan had told her that those people's target was Tobo. They would definitely find a way to bypass the bodyguards and attack Tobo. Therefore, once the chaos began, Tang Qiuqiu had to pay attention to her surroundings. Even in this room that was protected by multiple layers of bodyguards and defense systems, Tang Qiuqiu would not let her guard down. Silan had said that her target might not necessarily be a human. Castella was commanding the guards in the manor. Since the explosion had only occurred outside the manor, it meant that the people who had infiltrated the manor would not be able to get close to the core area of the manor at all. If they could not get close to Tobo, then they could only create chaos at the periphery to attract attention and seek an opportunity to infiltrate the core area of the manor. Therefore, Castella did not let down the guards at the core area of the manor. He reminded them to keep their eyes open and pay close attention to everything inside the manor through the defense and surveillance systems. The chaos has begun. In the guest room, Hui Mao, who was squatting on the windowsill, appeared to be very excited. He squinted his eyes and took a deep breath. "Wow, the smell of fish. Silan, when are we going to make our move?" Hui Mao was eager to give it a try. "Let's wait a little longer. The key person hasn't come out yet," Silan said as he looked out the window. "Alright, I think something special is coming." The cat's ears were perked up. If one were to look closely, one would notice that the fur inside the cat's ears were even trembling slightly. It was receiving all sorts of subtle sound waves that ordinary people could not hear. Over at the coastal waters, while fending off wave after wave of attacks from shoals of fish, Kirk finally heard what he wanted to hear. "Boss, all the echo conches have been moved into the spaceplane," an underling reported. "Good. Follow the previous plan. Throw them into space and detonate them." "Roger that." Kirk watched the spaceplane take off. It was only when the spaceplane left the atmosphere that his heart, which had almost jumped out of his throat, finally calmed down. "Mr. Kirk." Warsaw's voice sounded urgent. "What's wrong?" Kirk's heart, which had just calmed down, was in his throat again. "I'm afraid those big guys at the bottom of the deep sea are coming." Chapter 144. Those fellows in the deep sea. Can the tamer even control those big fellows? Kirk exclaimed in shock. Although Kirk did not know much about tamers, when he thought of those tyrants of the deep sea being controlled by a tamer, he really felt a chill run down his spine. That would be too much of a monster. No, they can't control the tyrants of the deep sea. However, they can control other fishes and change the environment of the sea, prompting those tyrants of the deep sea to move. You're saying that Wiesen's men changed the dissolved oxygen there in order to make it easier for those tyrants of the deep sea to move according to their route. Kirk recalled the area of the sea with extremely low dissolved oxygen. Kirk could not find the tamer who was controlling these shoals of fish. Until now, there was no news of the tamer at all. Although the tamer could not control those big fellows, they could awaken those fellows sleeping in the deep sea. Right now, the shoals of fish were still swarming in this direction. The awakened tyrants of the deep sea needed to forage for food, and they discovered that the surrounding waters were lacking in food and the dissolved oxygen was extremely low. Such an environment would force them to move to waters with a better environment and more food. The tamer had created a misconception and made them think that rich food and a good water environment would be in this direction. Warsaw ordered her subordinates to drive a spaceplane from the Binger family over. "Mr. Kirk, I can hold those big fellows back for a while. Use this time to think of a way to find that tamer. If push comes to shove, we'll have no choice but to use weapons of mass destruction." After all, this planet was very important to the Fenrir's family. However, if those high-energy weapons were to be used frequently, it would have an extremely serious impact on the environment and the marine ecosystem here. The destruction of the overall system would cause this sapphire to lose its luster. After all, the ocean was not a fish pond. This was something Kirk did not wish to see. Therefore, he could only follow Warsaw's plan for now. Kirk and Costella had never imagined that a tamer would be so capable. No wonder those old men of the Fenrir's family said that every sector had its own primordial power. It would be best if they could not come into contact with these primordial powers. After Warsaw entered her family's spaceplane, the spaceplane flew into the distance. After leaving the coastal waters, a round platform popped out from the front of the spaceplane. Warsaw stood on top of it. Under the surface of the sea, in the depths, a few huge creatures were moving towards the shore. In the distance, one after another, huge black shadows were coming over. Gazing at the endless sea, Warsaw let out a high-pitched chant from her throat. No one could understand what she was singing, but Kirk realized that the shoals of fish on this side of the sea had obviously calmed down, and the anti-interference scanner showed that the movement speed of those dots in the distant deep sea had also slowed down. Before the echo conch was brought out, Hua Sha did not dare to chant, as she was afraid that it would have the opposite effect. If the echo conch came into contact with the sound wave and performed an ensemble, then it would be over. Now that the issue of the echo conch had been resolved, Warsaw could finally relax. At the same time, she also took the opportunity to make the Fenrir's family wary of her and increase her own influence. She also made Kirk think highly of the Binger family, which would bring the Binger family even greater benefits in the future. The mysterious language, the high-frequency chanting, was like a song from the deep sea, deep and distant, filled with an ancient aura. This was the song sung by the bloodline of the ancient race of Sector H, the Ocean race. It could communicate with the higher-level creatures in the sea. The higher the evolutionary level of the creatures that lived in the sea, the smoother this kind of communication would be. Therefore, the shoals of fish attacking the coastal waters had only calmed down, but for those big fellows coming from the deep sea, they could understand the meaning behind the sound better. Kirk looked at the display screen of the instrument in his hand. The detectors set up around Warsaw's sea area could not transmit any data back. The sound wave interfered with the electromagnetic field in that area, disrupting the transmission of energy and signals. No wonder Warsaw insisted on using the Binger family's special spaceplane. It was made especially for Warsaw, and it could resist such sound waves. If it was any other spaceplane, it would have lost control and crashed a long time ago. Kirk now felt that he needed to re-evaluate the Binger family. Although there weren't many newcomers in the Binger family right now, and there was only one mermaid princess, it was still a family that originated from this sector after all. It was hard for Kirk to assess just how much hidden strength they still had. Take Warsaw for example. In terms of individual strength, she was only equivalent to a normal rank A genotype character. But if the abilities brought about by her bloodline were included, Kirk was willing to bet that if his trained bodyguards were to encounter such sound waves, they would definitely grab their heads and roll to the ground. No wonder Warsaw's status in the Binger family was so high. Other than her ability to handle affairs, her personal strength was also a significant factor. The other coastal areas of the continental plate and the underwater bases were attacked by shoals of fish. Therefore, Kirk had to think twice even if he wanted to transfer manpower over. This was the place with the highest number of guards. If he were to transfer manpower from the other places, something might go wrong. The people at the spaceport outside the planet could not be moved either. It was the planet's most important line of defense, so Kirk had not mobilized any more manpower. Is there still no news? Kirk asked his subordinate next to him with an ugly expression. Kirk felt that the tamer should be hiding in the vicinity, so he sent his subordinates to search for the tamer. But until now, they hadn't found a damn thing. This made him very dissatisfied, and at the same time, he felt a sense of wariness towards the ancient power of the sector that his elders spoke of. Warsaw's abilities were displayed on the surface, but the tamer was hidden in the shadows. The latter was more difficult to deal with. I'm sorry, boss, there's still no news. The subordinate next to Kirk bowed his head and said. Increase the intensity. They were in a hurry right now. Warsaw had said that she didn't know how long they could drag things out. Maybe they could drag things out for a few days, or maybe they would collapse in the next moment. She couldn't say for sure either. Yes. Sillin looked out the window at the other side of the sea. Although they were so far away, he could still hear the mermaid princess chanting. However, now was not the time to be amazed by this mermaid princess abilities. There were definitely not many people who could infiltrate the Fenier's family's territory, and Costella had already cleaned up a group of people based on some clues. In that case, the number of people left behind would be even fewer. What Sillin was waiting for was the most special person or people among the people left behind, a trainer who could control fish from the distant sea. Inside the manor, in the room where Tobo and the others were. After that explosion, the three little fellows had lost all desire to sleep. The bodyguards forbade them from going out, so they hung around the room out of boredom. They really had nothing to do, so Tobo and Ross started playing chess while Emma watched from the side. Just as the two little boys were grinding their teeth and Emma was cheering them on, three crisp popping sounds attracted the trio's attention. 3 perforated crabs lay on the ground not far away from them. They were the 3 crabs that they had caught from the beach purely for fun. Tang Kakikiu was holding a noiseless gun in her hand. She no longer looked at the crabs, but her eyes were sparkling. In another room of the manor, Costella received a report that some of the fresh seafood that was prepared for food from the kitchen and seafood storage had disappeared. Chapter 145. When Costella heard his subordinate's report, he sighed. They had been careless. Since the enemy had sent out a tamer, then it didn't matter if they were living in the sea or were treated as ornamental fish or fresh ingredients, all of them could be controlled by the tamer. At the same time, this also told Costella that the tamer was already very close to the manor. Otherwise, those sea creatures that were treated as ingredients and ornamental fish would not have such mobility. After all, they had avoided the eyes and ears of some people inside the manor, and this was not something they could do with their normal intellect. While Costella was issuing orders one after another, inside Tobo and the others' room, the 3 little fellows were glaring angrily at Tang Chiochio as they stared at the pierced crabs lying motionless on the ground. Although they did not know how the crabs had come out of the box in the first place, they were already dissatisfied with Tang Chiochio, and now they were even more furious. Tang Chiochio, what is the meaning of this? Emma was the first to jump out and point at Tang Chiochio and roared, "We went through a lot of trouble to catch them, and you dare shoot them? This is unforgivable." Tang Chiochio completely ignored her. Because Sillin had told her that the ones who attacked Tobo did not necessarily have to be human, Tang Chiochio relied completely on her instincts to kill everything that posed a threat to Tobo. In that instant just now, Tang Chiochio suddenly felt an anomaly, and then she saw the crabs that were not moving as usual. It was still the same 3 crabs. Tang Chiochio had watched Tobo and the others catch the crabs. At the time, the 3 crabs gave her a rather dull feeling, and they were just things that could be used as food. However, in that instant, she suddenly felt a murderous intent. It was a very obscure murderous intent that the bodyguards outside could not sense at all. It was also thanks to the fact that Tang Qiuqiu had been brought out of the chaotic lands of Sector V and was able to capture that obscure murderous intent. Otherwise, she would have died 1,000 times over in Sector V. Luo Shi was definitely biased towards his own people, condemning Tang Qiuqiu's evil deeds together with Emma, but Tobo only frowned, his gaze sweeping back and forth between Crab and Tang Qiuqiu. There must be a surveillance camera in the room. After Tang Qiuqiu opened fire, the people watching were afraid that these little brats would throw a tantrum and cause trouble. Moreover, the kid named Tang Qiuqiu was carrying a gun. The bodyguards outside the door opened and came in, especially the bodyguards from the Binger family. Because they were not familiar with Tang Qiuqiu, they all stood around Emma and Rost. However, after Phineas and the 2 bodyguards from the Binger family glanced at each other, they ignored Emma and Rost's complaints and gestured to their subordinates to check the situation in the room. Just now, Costella had informed them to pay close attention to all marine creatures, be it prawns, crabs, fish or sea snakes. It was very likely that they had already been controlled. Looking at the 3 crabs that Tang Qiuqiu had shot through, the 2 bodyguards could not help but sigh. It was fortunate that this little girl had noticed it, or there really was no telling what would have happened. At the same time, the Binger family's bodyguard was still guessing who on earth Tang Qiuqiu was, or was this just a blind cat running into a dead mouse? The bodyguards discovered a few more prawns and wriggling marine mollusks in a couple of hidden air vents. By now, even Emma and Rost had realized that something was wrong. After all, they still had a bit of a sense of crisis, and they were able to connect the dots a little. Therefore, they did not make a fuss right now, and quietly watched the bodyguards inspect everything inside the room. While the bodyguards were inspecting the room and observing Tang Qiuqiu at the same time, Tang Qiuqiu completely ignored them. When she felt that there was no threat, she sat down on a chair and started playing her game. She did not even look Tobo in the eye, angering him so much that he nearly flipped out again. Huimao could see what the surveillance cameras could see as well. Therefore, both Huimao and Silin were aware of all this. Qiuqiu is indeed an excellent hunter. At least, she's better than that bunch of bodyguards, said Huimao. She should be fine on her side, right? Probably. The bodyguards from the Phineas and Binger families aren't just for show. As long as they pay attention to the right direction, those marine creatures won't be able to get close to them. Silin looked at the sea outside the window. To be able to control these marine creatures with low intelligence inside the manor, I believe that the mastermind is about to come out soon. Although Warsaw had stalled those deep-sea giants, the shoal's attacks in the coastal areas were growing fiercer and fiercer. A layer of fish corpses floated on the surface of the sea, and fish bones were also deposited at the bottom of the sea. The overly dense mass of fish corpses was greatly disruptive to the Phineas family's movements, and some of the underwater bullets with low penetrative power were basically useless against them. However, they dared not use the more powerful torpedoes. It would be bad if they affected Warsaw, and if that happened, then they wouldn't just be facing these shoals, but the deep-sea overlords as well. Kirk was very anxious right now, and he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He clearly knew that the tamer was around, yet he could not find that cunning bastard. It was not a good idea to continue like this. He knew that the situation at the manor was probably very passive as well, and right now he only regretted underestimating the Vezin family's capabilities. If he thought about the worst-case scenario, Tobo might not be the only one who would be threatened this time. Even the entire Phineas family's arrangements on this planet would be severely affected. After all, the livable planets in Sector H were mainly dominated by the ocean. What a headache. While Warsaw was cautiously delaying the deep-sea overlords, Kirk was racking his brains for a solution, and Costello was commanding the people of the manor to strengthen the surveillance. Flat figures were approaching the coast under the cover of shoals of fish from the bottom of the sea near the shore. Therefore, while the spaceplanes in the air and the submarines were fighting closely against the shoals, the alarm system next to Kirk's hands suddenly rang. This was the first time it had sounded so fiercely since he reconfigured the surveillance program. What the hell is going on? Kirk looked at the display, and what he saw stunned him. Kirk, who had held an important position in the Fenier's family for many years, had never thought he would see such a scene. What was the difference between a bird and a fish? One was in the sky, and the other was in the water. This was what most people, including Kirk, thought. What Kirk saw now, however, completely overturned his previous opinion. Fish that lived in the water might not necessarily be incapable of flight. It would be a lie to say that he was not shocked as he looked at the flat figures rushing out of the sea. Kirk did not know what kind of fish they were. Excluding their tails, they were all more than 5 meters long, and some were even more than 10 meters long. They looked a little like manta rays, but they were flatter and lighter than manta rays. Their specialized pectoral fins were elongated like wings, allowing them to fly at low altitudes out of the sea. It was one thing if there was only one of these things, but now there were hundreds and thousands of them, and they were even showing signs of increasing. They crashed into the spaceplanes in the air as if they were unafraid of death, and seriously interfered with the spaceplane's ability to block the shoals in the sea. At the same time, because there were too many of them, some of them took the opportunity to charge towards the coast. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.